Koh Tao, written by Luke Richardson and read by Luke Richardson. Introduction. Hi, how are you? My name is Luke and I'm so glad you're here. I wanted just to jump on before we go into this audiobook to tell you a little bit about me and to thank you personally for taking the time to listen to this story. It really does mean so much. In 2020, the summer of 2020, I left my job as an English secondary school teacher, high school teacher, to pursue this passion of being an author full-time. And now, about 8-9 months later as I record this, I'm getting there. It's working. Day by day, I'm getting closer to achieving that dream. And that is because of people like you. And I'm totally appreciative of that. That's people who download my books, read my books, recommend my books, review them. So thank you for that. Whether this is the only book of mine you'll listen to or you'll read, or whether this is the first of many, you have invested some time in my stories, and I am really grateful for that. If you do end up liking this book, which I sincerely hope you do, because I really enjoyed writing it, if you'd like to, join my mailing list. That is where I keep in touch with people who enjoy my writing. And that, I think, hands down, has been my favourite part of publishing my novels, has been fostering that connection with people who've read them. I email about every week, sometimes every 2 weeks, talking about my travels, my adventures, my writing inspirations, the things I'm working on at the moment, all of those sorts of things. And I'd absolutely love for you to join us too, if you want to. You do that at my website, lukerichardsonauthor.com, and you get a free copy of this novel when you're there. So maybe you're already there already. So thank you for that. Right, I'll leave you to it. I'm going to get on to reading this. I'm really looking forward to sharing this story with you. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy. Chapter 1. Police, open up, came the voice, thick and dull through the thin door. Omar's eyes shot open. He shouldn't have been sleeping. He should have been listening for people approaching in the corridor outside. We know you're in there. You've got 10 seconds before we break down the... The officer stopped talking. Omar imagined him being interrupted by Mr. Sahin, the hotel manager, rushing along the corridor with the large master key. Omar leapt to his feet and crossed the dark room. He knew what the men outside wanted. They would demand to see his immigration papers. Omar had seen it often enough, the officer's gloved hands screwing the precious documents up at the corners before thrusting them back towards him. This was the 6th inspection in the last 2 weeks. The key grated in the lock. Omar imagined Mr. Sahin's face getting redder by the moment. Omar knew he would pay for this tomorrow. Why couldn't you answer the door, you imbecile? If that door gets broken down, it's coming out of your wages. The key ground, then stopped. Mr. Sahin must have used the wrong one. But it wasn't the door that worried Omar, nor was it the papers. Baby, we must wake up, he whispered, rocking his wife's sleeping body. The men are here. You know what you have to do. What? Hey? She said, stirring as his calloused hand shook her awake. Omar watched her big, walnut-coloured eyes flutter open. Even fraught with darkness and danger, she was beautiful. The police are here again. You know what you must do. Nafisa was suddenly alert. Her eyes darted left and right in the darkness. She nodded, and Omar backed away. Omar picked up his papers from the top of the small chest of drawers and crossed to the door. Another key now grated in the lock. Voices berated the delay. Mr. Sahin really would be angry in the morning. Omar inhaled a deep breath, rubbed the creases from the front of his shirt, and reached for the door handle. Chapter 2. Across the Gulf of Thailand, the city of Chumpphon laboured into the night. For many residents whose work for the day was complete, it was time to prepare food. As their lights blazed, the smell of lemongrass, lime and fish tumbled out into the night. For the men who worked at the city's dockyard, though, the shift was just beginning. They were required to unload the freighters which arrived with electronics from China, clothes from Bangladesh or cars from Japan, whatever the time of day or night. It was heavy, desperate and thankless work. A small army of women worked at the docks too. Their job was to sort the fish coming in on the trawlers, snapper for the tables of Chumpphon, barracuda for Phuket, or even sometimes marlin for Bangkok. A cacophony of shouts erupted as one such fishing trawler neared the far end of the oil-stained wharf. Dirty green in colour, it sat beneath an array of nets and pulleys. The craft shimmered under bright electric lights. A man jumped from the boat and secured it with 2 ropes, one at the bow, one at the stern. Then, great baskets of fish, glistening silver, got passed up to the quay and emptied across the wharf's dusty concrete. In a desperate attempt to evade their coming death, some of the stronger fish began flicking their fins and tails. A tuna, its scales shimmering an oily green, flapped towards the ocean. "Got it!" shouted a fisherman, bringing his heavy boot down on the fish's silver head. "Little bastard almost escaped," he said to the rest of the crew in their native Burmese. The fisherman removed his boot and stared into the dark and lifeless eyes. "If you go free, my family doesn't eat," he thought, kicking it back into the pile. Life on these shores is hard. Chapter 3. "Papers, now," one of the men snarled as Omar opened the door. A bright light was shone in his eyes, preventing him seeing the voice's owner. From the sheer mass of shapes, Omar assumed 2 officers and Mr. Sahin stood outside. Omar didn't see the officers, Inspector Kaya and Officer Deng. He'd run into them enough times. Each would be wearing a tightly fitting black shirt open at the neck and glinting with emblems of their rank. Omar handed across the thin bundle of papers, the most valuable thing in his life, other than Nafisa. Their families had sunk savings into funding their journey here, which took weeks across land and sea. These papers were the only things keeping them from being sent back again. The light dulled as it was redirected at the papers in the officer's gloved hand. A thick finger traced the information as greedy eyes looked for inconsistencies. Omar knew they were looking for anything that gave them cause to take him in and dig up some reason to send him back. Any reason would do. They held the paper beside his face and shone the light in his eyes as the officers compared him with the photograph. One said something in Thai and the other laughed. They all looked the same. Omar knew the language and understood, but kept quiet. They would leave soon. "Are you here on your own?" The light shone into the room behind him. Omar felt his body tense, his hands balled into fists. Has Nafisa got out okay? The officers pushed past Omar without waiting for a response. One of them snapped on the light. Omar's eyes stung. Omar exhaled with relief when he saw the room was empty. Nafisa had got out in time. That was good. The officers began to search the room. As Omar had expected, he recognised them as Inspector Kaya and Officer Deng, the same 2 as before, the same 2 who always got him up in the middle of the night for no reason at all. One was small and slight, yet muscular, and had a malevolent gaze, Deng. The other was large, rippled with fat, and seemed always to be sweating, Kaya. The smaller of the 2 opened a cupboard while the larger one pulled out a drawer and tipped out the contents. Omar felt himself ready to argue. Then, seeing the officer's glinting gaze, Omar swallowed his anger. They were looking for a reaction, any reason to take this further and drag him down to the station. Omar knew he couldn't let that happen, not now, not when they were so close. Omar glanced at the window, through which he knew Nafisa had fled. The room was on the first floor, at the back of the complex, overlooking the restaurant's flat roof. Omar imagined Nafisa now, standing with her back against the wall, directly below the jutting windowsill. She was safe for now, but if one of the officers looked out there was a good chance she'd be seen. Omar swallowed. His throat felt like sand. If Nafisa was discovered, he knew exactly what would happen. She didn't have the papers that he did. Although they'd arrived together, with the cost of the journey and the extortionate prices charged by government agents to get officially registered, they simply couldn't afford to buy 2. Omar had suggested the plan because he didn't know what else to do. They really had no other option. They would buy the papers for him, and then he would get a job and save as hard as possible to buy the papers for Nafisa. It wasn't ideal, as she'd have to stay hidden until they had her papers, but it was better than nothing. It was better than getting sent back. Anything was better than getting sent back. Omar was shaken back to the present as Inspector Kaya emptied the bin across the floor. The bags Omar had used to bring Nafisa leftover food from the restaurant crashed to the floor. The inspector dropped into a crouch, his sizable waistline stretching his tight trousers and poked amongst the packets. "A lot of food here for one little man," he said, glancing up at Omar. I work very hard, Omar said, forcing himself to smile. So I'm always hungry. His cheeks ached. Inspector Kea stood and kicked the pile of rubbish. It skittered across the floor and under the bed. Omar's fists clenched, but his expression remained calm. Officer Deng crossed to the window. Omar focused on the wall opposite. He wouldn't give anything away. Keeping his eyes locked, Omar expected at any second to hear the raised voices of discovery. Silence filled the room. Outside, a bird shrieked. To Omar, it sounded like a cry of pain. His eyes were almost closed now. Omar used all the strength he had to hope and pray that his wife would remain undiscovered. Beyond the rampaging officers, he heard the call of the sea. Ever since he was a boy, Omar had loved the sea. He longed to feel its salty kiss across his feet as he walked in the wet sand. He and Nafisa would do that one day. One day soon, they'd walk, gazing up at the Koh Tao sky, listening to the beautiful island around them. "Pass the light," Officer Deng said. "I think I see something." The torch, which had dazzled Omar 2 minutes ago, was passed across. A finger of light began to search the restaurant's flat roof below. Omar prayed harder. His hands hung limp at his sides. Now all he had was faith. Faith that things would work out. A radio squawked, and Inspector Kea unclipped it from his belt and held it against his ear. A tinny, high-pitched squeal strained from the speaker. Omar's guardian angel, perhaps? He held his breath. The bare floorboard creaked as Mr. Sahin shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "We gotta go. Some situation up at Mango Bay," Inspector Kea said. "Okay," Deng replied. "Nothing here anyway, just a bit of trash on the roof." Omar let his breath go. His pulse thumped in his ears. The officers shoved Omar out the way as they passed. Inspector Kea paused at the door and pushed Omar's papers against his chest. Kea's bloodshot eyes scanned from Omar and down to the mess on the floor. "You really should tidy this place up," Kea said. A growling noise came from his throat before he coughed and spat. A thick globule of phlegm landed an inch from Omar's bare feet. "People don't live like animals around here." Chapter 4. Further down the wharf, beyond a dormant ship-to-shore crane, a rust-coloured freighter lay heavily in the water. Cries of the dock workers echoed from the boat's open hold. Beneath the decks, cars were inched into position, boxes were stacked and livestock was secured for the 6-hour crossing. As soon as possible, they were already late, the boat would make the crossing from Champfon on Thailand's Gulf coast to the island of Koh Tao. A group of tourists stood on the top deck and watched the dark-skinned, thick-armed dockers load the final few boxes. With their bright clothes and smartphones, they were at odds with the decrepit freighter. These tourists had rejected the speed of the daytime catamaran, or the powerful engine of the tourist boat, in pursuit of what they thought to be the real Thailand. Why they would choose to spend the night on this slow hunk of steel, rather than the comfortable air conditioning of the tourist boats, was a mystery to the ship's owners. Their money was gladly accepted, though. Leo and Maya watched the final preparations below. The trip around Asia had been the best 2 months of Leo's 26 years, and as he watched Maya now, focused on the scene below, he thought about the decision he'd made. It was the right thing to do, definitely. To be here with this woman was just incredible. One of the men shouted as the final checks were made and the ramp was raised. The ship was untied, and with a guttural thump from its strong diesel engines, they finally broke out into the inky blue ocean. For half an hour, Leo and Maya watched the shore fade into a twinkling necklace of pearls. Stars peppered the sky above them. Leo gazed up with wide-eyed amazement. The stars were never like this in his home city of Brighton. You got the occasional star that bullied its way through the sky of perpetual grey, but nothing like this. Here, out in the Gulf of Thailand, there were stars between stars. Stars shimmering in great swathes from one side of the sky to the other. "Let's try and get some sleep," Maya shouted over the rumbling engine. "Come on, we've got to claim our bunks. They'll all be taken otherwise. You don't want to be sleeping out here, do you?" Just wait a second," Leo said, looking at Maya. She was beautiful. Her hair, longer than it used to be at home, was tied up with a colourful band they'd bought in Bangkok a few days ago. Her eyes seemed even larger than usual beneath the glittering stars and the boat's weak lights. It was as though their pupils, the colour of the daytime ocean, absorbed him completely. Now would be a good time, Leo thought, his hand reaching for his wallet. The other pair of tourists on the top deck headed below. Leo and Maya were alone in the endless black silk of the ocean and the flawless tapestry of stars. Just wait a minute, Leo said again. He stepped closer to the woman he knew he'd follow to the ends of the earth. A man climbed the stairs behind them and stood looking out at the ocean. He was a similar age to Leo and Maya, and muscular and lean. Maya's eyes flicked in his direction. Her lips curved at the edges. Leo took a step towards Maya. Now would be the perfect time to ask the most important question of his life. Leo heard a thunderous, splintering crack. It sounded as though the boat had been driven into a wall of rock. The deck below him moved. His eyes went wide. Leo watched the great steel bow of the ship rear upwards. Chapter 5. Until that moment, the noisiest thing Leo had ever heard was a minor car accident as a child. It wasn't much. A car had careered into the back of them at a red light. But, to this day, Leo remembered the devastating crack of twisting metal as the cars buckled together. That was nothing compared to the noise now. The bow of the boat hurtled upwards, and lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled and crashed. The boat reached an impossible angle and then slammed into the trough between the waves. Shockwaves stung Leo's body, and the dark spray slapped his face. "Get to the side!" Maya shouted, reaching for his hands. She'd already made her way to the railing and was holding on. Leo grabbed Maya's hand. The boat began to climb the next dark, mountainous wave. Looping his arm through the railing, Leo felt the chugging of the boat's engine as it strained against the storm. The boat slammed down, destined to crack and be swallowed by the ocean. Leo's chest pounded against the railings. He held on as tightly as he could. Leo felt a tightness in his chest as the cold spray soaked him again. It was as though a great weight had been placed across him. Each breath was fraught and difficult. Panic was coming. Leo had suffered with anxiety most of his life. Sometimes he could go months without it affecting him. Other times he'd get 2 or even 3 attacks in a day. Over the last 15 years, he'd tried many things to try and appease it. He'd been on prescribed medication, but had stopped taking them after they made him feel constantly docile. Leo had only ever found one thing that really helped: Maya. Since he and Maya had got together 3 years ago, the anxiety had seemed to fade. She seemed, even without words, to give him confidence and reassurance. As the ship skewed for another climb, lightning forked into the ocean somewhere nearby. Leo looked at Maya. Although her eyes were closed to slits against the spray and her knuckles whitened on the railing, she smiled. Seeing the glimmer of her teeth, Leo felt himself smile too. With Maya, things would be all right, like they always had been. Leo felt his breathing relax. He noticed that the top deck had got busier. Many of the travellers, unable to sleep as the boat writhed and rocked, came back up to experience the storm. They watched, wide-eyed, as the bow climbed again, their faces bathed in the shimmering lightning overhead. One man, his long grey hair and beard whipping from his face, snapped open a can of beer. Chapter 6. Nafisa opened her eyes and looked around their shabby room. Although they had tidied it late last night after the police had gone, the place was still a mess. The only decorations on the yellowed walls were a multitude of stains and cracks. The few bits of furniture were falling apart, and the floor, no matter how often it was swept, was constantly alive with the scurrying sound of roaches. Omar had laid out his prayer mat beside the bed, one of the few possessions they'd managed to bring, and muttered rhythmically as he touched his head to the floor before straightening to his knees again. Nafisa let her eyes close as she listened to the cadenced whispers of her husband's prayers. She'd hardly slept. After the police had left and they'd tidied the room, a storm had whipped up from nowhere. Having lived on the island a couple of months now, albeit confined to the room, Nafisa was getting used to the weather. Everything could change in a moment here. From beautiful bright sunlight casting deep orange across the room one minute to thunder and lashing rain the next. She was just looking forward to being able to go out in it. "I don't know why you bother with that," Nafisa said, watching as Omar stood and rolled up the mat. "It's not like it's done us any good." Nafisa sat up in bed and propped her head against the dirty wall. "You are wrong," Omar replied, filling the kettle from the tiny sink. "Allah is always looking out for us. Even if you can't see it right now, he has a plan and it will come right." "But how can he let his people run and hide like we have to? I was crouched behind a stinking sewage pipe for half an hour last night." "That is exactly proof." Omar clicked the kettle on, his face illuminated by his large smile. "If you'd stayed in the same place below the windowsill, you would have been caught. But last night, something told you to go a little further and hide behind that stinking sewage pipe." Omar crossed the room and bent down so his face was level with Nafisa's. "That's how Allah works. He is in everything, from the decisions you make to the rays of sun. Get up, look at this." Omar stretched his arms out expansively towards the window. "I don't have to get up and see that," Nafisa said, her mood thawing. She could never resist her husband's buoyant temperament. In fact, the first time she saw that smile, the pure honesty and warmth of it, Nafisa knew they would marry. Maybe Allah had a plan there. You do. Get up and look," Omar said, holding out his hand. Nafisa saw the burn marks on his wrist and forearms in the bright light. They were an echo of their previous life. Reluctantly, she got to her feet and let Omar lead her to the window. "Allah has made this world for us to enjoy." Omar took her in his arms as she looked out at the early morning light. Beneath them, detritus glimmered across the restaurant's flat roof, the roof onto which Nafisa had run for her life last night. Feeling Omar's arms around her, Nafisa smiled too. Maybe there was some truth in what he said. Omar's belief had got them this far. "If you listen closely," Omar extended one hand in the direction of the unseen ocean, "you can hear the waves. Very soon we'll be walking in those waves. I promise you that." "You promise?" Nafisa said, looking up at her husband. She knew her large, almond-coloured eyes had the same effect on him as his smile had on her. "I will give everything in this world to make it happen," Omar said, as the kettle grumbled to a boil. "But right now, I have to go. We have guests arriving on the morning's ferry." "Do you really have to leave me right now?" Nafisa said, knitting her fingers together behind his back. "Yes, I'm afraid I do. Mr. Sahin is already not very happy with me after last night." Nafisa's face contorted into a sulky frown. "But it's okay," Omar said. "I have a present for you." Omar pulled a paperback book from one of the drawers which had remained untouched in last night's raid. "This was left in one of the guest rooms yesterday. I'm not sure what it's about, but you could practice your reading. Better you are able to read English, the better jobs we will get. We're not going to be working here forever." Omar placed the book in Nafisa's hand. His impossibly wide smile seemed to broaden even more. "The beach," Nafisa read slowly. "I'd rather go to the beach than read about it." Omar ignored her comments and pointed towards a package next to the kettle. "There's some food in there for you. I got it for you yesterday." Omar kissed her on the forehead, then, disengaging from her arms, crossed to the door. "And you should probably have a wash," he said. "You smell like sewage pipe." Chapter 7. "You know it was my birthday yesterday," Leo said, as he and Maya sat on the edge of the top deck. Their feet dangled through the railings. After an hour or so, the storm had faded and now a mirror, flat ocean surrounded them as the brightening sky prophesied the dawn's approach. "Did you want me to sing happy birthday to you?" Maya replied without turning. Her eyes were pinned to the horizon from which a hazy sliver of sun had begun to sparkle. "No, that's okay," Leo said, laughing and turning to watch the sun himself. "Being here is a present. I wasn't expecting anything." "That's what I thought," Maya said without expression. Her eyes glimmered. "You must be getting really old now, though. You'll have to give up this staying up all night lark soon and just go back to wearing your slippers." Leo thought of the slippers he used to wear at home in Brighton. It seemed incongruous here. The place was so beautiful, so exciting and fresh. How could he even go back there? It felt like somebody else's life altogether. "You're catching up, though," Leo said, putting his arm around Maya. She sat rigidly without warming to his affection. "Hey, look," Maya said, shaking off Leo's hand. "Land!" Ahead of them, a green outline rose from the blue nothingness of the sky and the sea. Half an hour later, the boat slid alongside the wooden structure of the May Head Pier. The day was already warming up. Leo felt his eyes ache. He was so tired, he just wanted to close them and rest, just for a moment. But the island before them was too beautiful, too perfect to miss. A collection of bright buildings clung around the edge of the impossibly blue water, beyond which dense, forest-covered hills rose towards the sky. The muscular thudding of the ship's engine, which Leo had grown used to during the crossing, sank into its lowest register and then stopped completely. Sounds of the quay filled the silence. Raised voices from somewhere nearby organised the disembarkation of the ship. Further away, the engine of a long-tailed boat squealed as it slipped through into the harbour. Leo climbed to his aching feet and stretched. Then, shaking the movement back into his hands, he looked at a fishing boat moored further down the quay. The copper and teal-coloured boat was alive with a battalion of men in orange overalls. They cleaned, loaded and prepared the boat for its next trip. As Leo watched, a man dressed differently to the others climbed down from the bridge and scanned the working men. Leo surmised that he was probably the man in charge, the skipper or captain or first mate or whatever the correct nautical term was. Even from 100 feet, Leo saw that his brow was darkened in anger and his fists were clenched. The skipper spotted a man at work on the ship's stern and marched towards him. He slapped the man around the head with an open palm. Leo felt himself jolt in shock. "We're going," Maya said, standing and retying her hair. "Come on." Yeah, sure," Leo said, shaking himself back into focus. Down on the quay, Leo and Maya retrieved their bags from the piles the dock workers had stacked them in and headed in a sleepless glaze towards the collection of buildings. A rust-covered forklift truck rolled from the boat with 2 pallets of bricks, narrowly avoiding 2 dock workers carrying large bundles of toilet rolls. Everything that came and went from this island, Leo realised, had to come and go on boats like this. Leo pulled his bag tight and said a silent thank you. Firstly, that they'd made it through the storm, and secondly, that the boat's state of disrepair had been hidden by darkness when they boarded. At the end of the pier, a huddle of people waited to collect, advise and sell to the new arrivals. Leo's eyes flicked from one person to the next under a chorus of "nice cheap hotel, clean room" and "no cockroach hotel." Maya ignored the waiting scrum and led them towards a man with their names written on a sheet of paper. "You are Maya and Leo, yes?" the man said, smiling broadly. Leo felt himself smile in return. "My name is Omar," the man said, his left hand placed against his chest. "I am a pleasure to meet you. If you follow me, I'll take you to your lovely hotel." Chapter 8. Nothing annoyed Inspector Kea quite as much as petty crime. "What is this?" he said to his subordinate. Officer Deng sat at his desk completing some kind of paperwork. It could have been a crossword for all that Kea cared. Deng looked up as Kea tapped the whiteboard where "missing phone" was scrawled. "Oh, I wrote that yesterday," Deng said, squinting up at the board. "I'm sure you did," Kea replied, "but that wasn't what I asked. I don't care whether you wrote it or when you wrote it. I asked, what is it?" Deng ducked as Kea launched the board marker in his direction. It bounced from the wall and clanged behind an overflowing filing cabinet. A tourist lady came in yesterday, said her phone had been stolen," Deng said, quickly for fear of more projectiles. "She said she'd last seen it somewhere near the beach. I took her friend's number and the hotel she was staying at and said if we found it, we'd let her know." Inspector Kea nodded. Thick jowls that hung beneath his damp chin and spilled over his collar wobbled with the movement. He wiped sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his shirt. "That all sounds very reasonable," Kea said, turning to his subordinate. Deng smiled, exposing a row of sharp white teeth. "But it's not a bloody case, though, is it? It's not something we have to investigate, so it shouldn't be on the cases board." Kea shouted the final 2 words, and Deng ducked just in time to avoid being hit by the board eraser. Kea grumbled back to his desk and slumped into the creaking chair. He had to get out of here soon. This place was killing him. As a young officer, Kea had risen quickly through the ranks of the Bangkok police force. But after one mistake, One small error in which the wrong man had been pursued and shot. Kea had been transferred. At the time, he thought he'd gotten off lightly, transferred to an island rather than facing criminal charges, but now, approaching 3 years on Koh Tao with only the half-witted Deng to talk to, he wasn't so sure. And it wasn't just any old island. It was an island where nothing happened. Nothing at all. A lost phone, a small car accident, a few misbehaving foreigners, but there weren't even that many of them. It wasn't Koh Phangan with its full moon parties and all-night raves. Neither was it Koh Samui, home to one of the toughest prisons in the country. He was here, on Koh Tao, where, quite literally, nothing ever happened. Kea screwed his face into a snarl. He was so sick of checking the papers of the island's Burmese immigrants and the occasional tourist incident. Kea folded his arms above his sizable stomach. What he really needed was a big case. A big case he would solve very quickly to show that he was better than all this small island crap. Chapter 9. You have been choosing well, Omar said, turning the battered yellow jeep down the narrow road that led to the resort. The cabins are often booked up. They are most popular. You were lucky to get one. Maya had booked the place months ago and knew exactly where they were going. Leo, on the other hand, had no idea. Until 3 weeks ago, he thought they'd already be home by now. Omar had talked for the entire journey. There were many places Leo and Maya could visit while they were on the island. Tucked away secret coves, diving schools, an old lighthouse were just the start. From the comfort of the back seat, Leo watched the dense jungle of the island slip past and let the words drift over him. Omar pulled to a stop outside the hotel's reception and turned to Leo and Maya in the back. "Here we are," he said, his disc of a smile iridescent in the morning light. "I hope the drive was comfortable. The roads around here are very bumpy." Omar killed the engine, leapt from the jeep, opened Maya's door and offered her his hand as she stepped down. "You'll need to fill in the forms here," Omar said, showing them the door of the resort's reception. "Then I'll show you to your beautiful cabin." Leo stepped inside and shuddered beneath the fierce draft of the first air conditioning they'd felt since leaving Bangkok. A marble and dark wood reception area shone beneath bright lights. A young woman smiled at them from behind the grand reception desk. "You'll need to fill this in," she said, passing across a document and a pen, "and I'll take your passports." "Are we okay just to leave one passport?" Maya said, abruptly. Her eyes slid from the woman to Leo. I just prefer to keep mine with me." The woman made a gesture of her head that was neither a shake nor a nod. "I suppose one is okay," she said, accepting Leo's crisp passport and checking the document. "Thank you. Amar will show you to your cabin." Outside, Amar had moved the jeep and stood in the shade of a palm tree with both their bags slung over his shoulders. Leo winced at the thought of the bag's weight. He had enough trouble just carrying his own. "Now, I will show you the most beautiful place in the world." Omar led Leo and Maya down a curving path set between well-preened lawns. Like a magician revealing an illusion, Omar extended an arm as they rounded the reception building. The resort's private cove was revealed. Blue water shimmered between twin headlands, and the white sand of the beach nestled beneath the curving palms. In the centre, a wooden jetty extended across the glossy waves. At its end, chairs and loungers sat draped in colourful fabric. The water glittered, and the palm fronds rustled as a warm breeze passed across them. Further down the beach, a man picked up driftwood, while another raked out the sand. "It's beautiful," Leo said, inhaling as though the magnificence was palpable. Beside him, Maya stood silent. "And this is your cabin," Omar said, pointing to the first in the row of wooden buildings which lined the beach. 2 hammocks hung across the small deck, and the double glass doors led straight into the bedroom. Taking the key from Leo, Omar unlocked the door, placed their bags beside the bed, and showed himself out. "Thank you," Leo said, pulling a note from his pocket. Omar's smile became even wider as he accepted the note and pushed it between upturned palms. "Thank you," said Omar, bowing. "If you need anything at all, I can sort for you. I'm always here. Say room service, cocktails, beers or food, I bring you, no bother. Do you want anything now?" "No, thank you," Leo said, hearing the shower pipes begin to rattle from the bathroom. "I think we're going to get some sleep. It's been a long night." Yes, of course, Omar said, stepping backwards. When you do need something, you let me know. When Maya had finished in the shower, Leo let the warm water pummel his body for a full 10 minutes. Closing his eyes, he could still picture the cove outside, the jetty, the glistening water. Now this was the perfect place. Tonight, he would ask the most important question of his life. What do you? Leo said, walking into the room, but trailing off as he saw Maya lying motionless on the bed. It had been a sleepless night with the storm on the boat. Leo lay next to Maya, put his hand on her hip and closed his eyes too. This is going to be the perfect place, he thought, smiling. Tonight. As Leo settled and his breathing slowed into sleep, Maya opened her eyes. She'd been up all night too, but for her busy mind, sleep was a long way off. Shaking Leo's hand from her hip, she thought about the plan. This time tomorrow, she thought, blinking hard, it will all be over. Chapter 10. Omar closed the cabin door and looked out at the ocean. The indigo waters of the bay murmured against the freshly raked sand. Although it was still early, a pair of guests lounged beneath a low carving palm tree as a small boat crept across the horizon. Omar folded the 50 baht note Leo had given him and slipped it into his pocket. He thought about what it would be like to walk on this sand with Nafisa. That's how it would be once they had the last couple of 100 baht saved for her papers. They were close. The envelope in the tin box beneath the loose floorboard was almost full. Maybe a week or two with tips, they would be able to go to the office in May Had and get the paperwork done. Then they would be safe. They would both be safe. Walking free on the sand together was a dream Omar and Nafisa had shared for some time. Omar slipped a foot from his sandal and dug his toes in the warm sand. We'll be here soon, he thought, doing this for real. Omar, came a rough voice from behind him. Omar didn't react at first. He was too absorbed in his daydream. Omar, come here now, you Kinba. Omar shook himself back into focus and turned. Mr. Sahin stood at the top of the steps. My office, now, the manager spat, rubbing a dirty dishcloth across his glistening forehead. Please explain to me, Mr. Sahin said, even before Omar was through the door of the tiny office behind the kitchen, why I employ dozens of people here, yet you're the only one I have to get up in the middle of the night for. The room was oppressively hot, and the smell of burning spices hung in the air. Omar searched for the right words. He'd been learning Thai for a few years, but right now his knowledge was coming up short. Mr. Sahin's desk was awash with papers. An old-fashioned computer monitor sat on one end and a perpetually knocking Lucky Cat on the other. There is no excuse, is there? Mr. Sahin continued. I have a hotel to run. If the police want to see you in the middle of the night, that's none of my business. You sort that out with them. But I... Now listen. Mr. Sahin dabbed at his forehead again, the towel already soaked through. There are hundreds of people that could do your job. You go, I get another. Just like that. Mr. Sahin snapped his fingers. If you wake me up again, he pointed a bony finger at Omar. You're gone. Understand? But the police, I don't care, and I don't want to hear it. Mr. Sahin's age-spotted fist crashed into the desk. The computer monitor shuddered. I'll say that once more, just to make sure you get it. If I get woken up because of you, Mr. Sahin's dark eyes riveted Omar to the spot. You're gone. Do you understand that? Omar nodded. I can't hear you. Yes, I understand, Mr. Sahin. Sorry to wake you. Good. Sahin folded his arms. One of the cleaners hadn't turned up, so go check what rooms need cleaning. Then you're working on the jetty this evening. Chapter 11. Leo's eyes shot open. It took him a few seconds of looking around the darkening cabin to realise where he was. The sleep had been like air to a drowning man. After closing his eyes, Leo had fallen straight into the deep abyss of dreamlessness. A sleep so deep, even the memories of the stormy seas and rusty boats couldn't permeate it. Leo sat up and looked around the cabin. The walls were the same dark wood as the exterior. Tasteful modern prints in azure blue and sunshine yellow hung on each wall. Leo ran a hand across the bed beside him. and although the sheets were creased to Maya's shape, she was gone. The room was empty. Feeling a tightness squeeze his chest, Leo sat up straight and made himself take a deep breath. She'll be out on the beach, or in the bar, Leo thought. If he knew Maya at all, she'd be in the bar. Leo got out of bed, pulled on his shorts, and stepped across to the open door. The light beyond had faded from the crisp light of morning to a muggy yellow. He must have been asleep most of the day. Maya sat on the end of the jetty, with her feet dangling in the glistening water and a tall glass beside her. Seeing her silhouette, Leo felt his anxiety dissipate. He grabbed a t-shirt from his bag and pulled it on. Checking he had his wallet, he headed for the door with a flutter of excitement in his gut. This was it. "Did you sleep well?" Leo said, sitting next to Maya. The late afternoon had cooled, and now a refreshing breeze moved in from the ocean. "Yes, thanks," Maya replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her clothes were the same loose-fitting style she'd worn their whole trip. Leo couldn't picture her wearing anything different now. "Good evening again," came a voice from behind them. Leo turned and saw Omar carrying a cold beer and a bowl of noodles. "Beer and pad thai for the lady," Omar said, placing the bottle down beside Maya. His smile was as wide and bright as it had been that morning. "Can I get you anything, sir?" "Call me Leo, please, and I'll have a beer too." "Any food?" Leo looked at Maya's steaming pad thai. "Maybe in a few minutes. I've just woken up." "OK, Mr. Leo, one beer coming your way." Leo smiled as Omar sidled off in the direction of the restaurant. Maya picked up the chopsticks and took a mouthful of the noodles. A boat emerged from beyond the headland and crept along the horizon. The faint sound of voices skipped across the water. Will there be a better moment than this? Leo thought, looking at Maya. He'd wanted to ask her for nearly 2 months now. The ring had been stashed in his wallet the entire time, but every moment he thought was perfect had moved fleetingly past. Watching Maya now, Leo thought back through them. The rooftops overlooking the Taj, the beach in Goa, the train journey, all had been perfect in their own ways, and each time he'd failed to ask. Leo felt the rising drums of anxiety. He pulled a deep breath. He and Maya were going home soon. He needed to ask her before then. Leo steadied himself and gripped the shape of his wallet through his shorts. He should remove the ring while Maya was distracted eating and then hold it until she was finished. Then he would ask the question, the most important question of his life. "I'm finished," Maya said, sliding the half-finished plate of pad thai to the side. "It's so good, but the heat has killed my appetite. It's also so cheap, I think we could eat anything on the menu." Leo's throat felt dry. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt huge. His chest tightened. Taking a slow breath, he willed himself to calm. He had to calm down, breathe, focus, calm. He needed to do this now. Breathe, focus, calm. Maya's eyes examined Leo for a second before turning back out towards the ocean. The sun crept lower, and the sky drained of its colour. Somewhere in the jungle behind them, a bird called and another answered. Breathe, focus, calm. This was Leo's moment. He wanted this, the most important question of his life. There's been something I wanted to talk to you about," Leo said, dragging his wallet awkwardly from his shorts with shaking hands. Maya turned to look at him. Her eyes narrowed. I've just had the best 2 months, Leo said, pausing to draw another lungful of air. Maya blinked. A cat, toying with its prey. "One beer for you, Mr. Leo." Omar placed a bottle of beer beside Leo. "Miss Maya, you have finished the pad thai. Was it not to your liking?" "Yes, finished, thanks, Omar. It was lovely," Maya smiled. "The heat kills my appetite." "Oh, no problem at all." Maya picked up the bowl. "This is a really special view, don't you think?" Omar took a giant gulp of the sea air. "Most special, wonderful," he said, before turning and walking back towards the restaurant. Leo took a long swig of the beer. Chapter 12. The sun was creeping from the sky by the time Nafisa felt hungry. After Omar had left for work, she'd gone back to sleep and then spent hours inching her way through the beach. The book was interesting, Although Nafisa didn't understand all of the words, she was able to follow the story. In it, a man was looking for the perfect beach in Thailand. This confused Nafisa completely. In her experience, Thailand had so many wonderful beaches. How was it possible for a wealthy man not just to get a bus to one of them? On another level, it troubled her that someone could be so ungrateful for the beauty all around them. Nafisa finished the chapter and looked around for something she could use as a bookmark. The room was empty. Feeling a welling disquietude, Nafisa folded over a corner of the page. It felt sacrilegious to defile a piece of art by folding the corner, but she didn't know what else to do. She reassured herself, placing it carefully on the bed, that the paperback was tatty anyway. Nafisa stood and stretched. She felt guilty that Omar was out there working so hard for them when all she seemed to do was mooch around the room. It didn't feel good at all. She wanted to be out there helping, except from when she hid from the police. Nafisa hadn't been outside the room and its tiny connected toilet in over a month. She stepped over to the window and glanced at the dimming sky. Although the sun was creeping towards the horizon, the air was still warm. Nafisa hoped it would cool down soon. The room was stiflingly hot during the daylight hours. The window had no curtains, so during the heat of the day, an unhindered square of light sprawled across the floor. With his usual optimism, Omar had taken this as a sign. There were no curtains, but then they weren't needed, as the restaurant's flat roof obscured anyone from looking in. Nafisa considered pointing out that the restaurant did nothing to help the blazing midday heat, but she knew that would sound unappreciative. She had the easy job. It was Omar who had to leave early in the morning and didn't get back until after dark. Once they'd paid for her immigration papers, things would be easier though, she told herself. Then they could both earn money, and maybe find somewhere better to live. Prompted by her rumbling stomach, Nafisa crossed to the cabinet which served as a kitchen. The food Omar had bought her yesterday was in a plastic bag on top of the cabinet. Omar had, in a way Nafisa had seen hundreds of times, charmed one of the chefs into packing up any leftovers. How they thought Omar, a man formed of only skin and bone, could eat that much on his own, Nafisa had no idea. She undid the bag and spread the food across the counter. There was a small amount of Thai curry, some rice, 2 spring rolls, and some potatoes cut into strips and then fried. Nafisa wasn't sure what this final, unusual dish was. The cold, oily potatoes really didn't taste of anything, but Nafisa was thankful for every mouthful. After she'd finished her meal, Nafisa set about the task of washing. She couldn't have her husband thinking she really smelt of sewage pipe. Sniffing her shoulder, she smiled. She didn't smell at all. He'd been teasing her. There was a communal shower room at the end of the landing for the use of the workers, but, of course, as no one could know she was here, Nafisa wasn't able to use that. She filled a bucket with cold water from the tiny sink and thought about her simple routine. It was luxurious in comparison to the conditions they'd endured on their journey here. The week-long ride in the back of an old oil tanker had been the worst bit. She and Omar had held on to each other for days as the tanker rumbled through the rural roads of Myanmar and then into Thailand. Around them, 20 other people huddled in the near darkness as the tanker clunked and clanged. Nafisa had been able to smell the nasty gasoline residue for weeks. Nafisa knew that every one of those other people were Rohingya, like Omar and herself. They had been forced from their land by the government that was supposed to protect them. If they refused, they were beaten, sometimes worse. Many of their friends and family had made it to refugee camps in Bangladesh, others onto boats, and a few, like them, made the long journey south to Thailand. Nafisa knew that they were the lucky ones because they'd escaped. Now the challenge was not being sent back. Nafisa knew, her eyes threatening tears, they could never go back. Nafisa heard voices on the landing beyond the thin walls and was suddenly alert. 2 men talked in hushed voices. She heard their footsteps as they neared the door. They paused. Nafisa watched the door. In her mind, the sound of nightmares played over and over, the key grating in the lock, the strong hands of the police dragging her from the room. It would be even worse if Omar wasn't here. He wouldn't even know where she'd gone. The voices continued but were muffled by the door. Nafisa listened hard, but couldn't work out what the men were saying. It might be the police coming back. Nafisa knew she had to move. Dressing quickly, she pushed away any sign that she had been in the room and crossed to the window. Seeking refuge on the flat roof would be risky during the day when people still moved around the resort. But if a key began to churn in the lock, then it was a risk she'd have to take. Nafisa placed her hands on the windowsill and prepared to jump. She could be out on the roof before the door was opened. She had done it enough times before. The hushed words continued from beyond the door. One voice rose in what sounded like a farewell. Then footsteps thudded away down the passage. Then silence. But there had been 2 men, and only one set of footsteps had walked away. One man was still standing on the other side of the door. Nafisa's knuckles whitened on the windowsill. She watched the door for long seconds, hearing Omar's 5 knocks, rat, tat, 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 tat. Her fear melted into a smile. Omar's key nestled into the lock and the door swung open. "I just got you some more food," he said, holding another plastic bag. "It's pad thai. I know you like that. I thought I'd bring it straight up before it got thrown away." "You just missed the smell of sewer pipe, didn't you?" Nafisa said, crossing the room and putting her arms around her husband. "Of course," Omar said, his smile broadening at the sight of the almond eyes. "But I can't stay long. I have to go back to work soon." Chapter 13. "I don't think I've ever been anywhere as beautiful as this," Leo said, lying back on the jetty. The colours of the day were draining from the sky, and tropical birds flashed through the twilight streaks of pink and purple. "I knew you'd like it," Maya replied in a whisper, her feet dangling in the darkening water. "How did we get here? I mean, this is crazy. It's like a different world." Leo pointed towards the unbroken ocean in front of them. A light from a passing boat left shimmering trails in the water. "Koh Tao is a special place because it's hard to get to," Maya said, looking out into nothing. Leo sat up and looked at her. She was beautiful. I'm just glad to be here," he said, looking at her profile in the light of the setting sun. "Even the extra month. This is the time. This is the moment. This is it." In a way, Leo knew he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment, this place, and this woman. Maya turned to face Leo as he lay backwards. The sound of water slapping the jetty's supports echoed up from beneath them. Somewhere nearby, people spoke in a language Leo didn't understand. "I knew you'd like it," Maya said, her expression revealing nothing. "Yeah, I'm struggling to take it in," Leo said, raising himself on his elbows. "It's got to be the most beautiful place I've ever been. Now would be the perfect moment. Just focus. Breathe, calm, focus." "Yeah, it's been great," Maya said, turning back to face the water. A chill gusted past them, blowing Maya's loose-fitting top tight against her skin. Leo's eyes followed it. He couldn't help it. This was it. Leo turned away from Maya and fumbled the ring from his wallet. Maya looked out towards the ocean. This was it. Although the one-need stance dictated by tradition wouldn't be possible on the jetty, Leo hoped the setting would make up for it. The moment, the perfect moment is now. Leo inhaled deeply and looked at Maya. "This is it," he exhaled. "Will you?" he said. An eddy of wind skipped past, rushing towards the curving palm trees on the shore. Leo's throat felt dry. His tongue stumbled over unfamiliar words. "Will you marry me?" he said. Time hung still. Unblinking, Leo held his breath. Maya opened her eyes wide. Maya glanced from Leo's expectant expression to the ring in his outstretched hand. "Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful," she said, picking it up. Leo hadn't seen the ring in weeks. Now, with its colours refracting in the twilight, it looked perfect. Maya examined it. She held it against the sky. Her expression remained blank. Leo hung on any movement, any indication of her coming answer. Maya stood and looked down at Leo. Her wide eyes sparkled. "Come to our room in 5 minutes. Then you'll get your answer," she said, turning and walking towards the beach. Chapter 14. 5 minutes must be up, Leo thought, climbing to his feet. His sun-warmed skin tingled in the new chill of the evening. It wasn't a chill like he was used to back in Brighton's perpetual drizzle. It felt more like tension hanging in the air, a cold front of hopelessness moving in from the east. In truth, Leo realised as he looked towards the once shimmering ocean, now just a dark, endless abyss, he had no idea if 5 minutes was up at all. With his heart beating at twice his normal speed, any amount of time could have passed. To waste a few more seconds, he didn't want to appear too keen, Leo stretched his legs and pushed his shoulder blades together. A car engine coughed somewhere on the hill behind him. Then it spluttered and sprung to life. Wheels skittered over loose gravel and the noise of the engine faded into the unquiet jungle. A bird pounded the heavy air with its strong wings. How it could see where it was going in the almost total darkness, Leo had no idea. Leo smiled to himself. He had done it. He had done something that a few years ago he'd never expected to do. He'd asked Maya to marry him, asked her to spend her whole life with him. The thought made him shudder. She was going to say yes, of course she was. That was just one of those things she liked to do, doing things on her terms. Leo looked around the jetty, its luxurious chairs now empty, its hanging festoons guiding him towards the land, towards the cabin, towards Maya. What would she be doing in there? Leo felt a flutter of excitement as he took his first step towards the cabin and towards the woman he hoped to be his wife. "I'm coming in," Leo whispered, knocking at the door. His voice sounded futile in the growing noise of the island. A chorus of insects whined and chittered, and a pair of dogs barked without remorse. "Are you ready?" "Am I ready?" Leo glanced back at the jetty's runway of light slicing into the dark ocean. Above, the stars ran and skipped. The same stars he'd seen yesterday, when this was just an abstract plan. Now, by saying those words, the idea was forming into a reality. He was making it come true. Taking a deep, nourishing breath of the night air, Leo turned. This was it. He was going to get his answer. "You're full of surprises tonight," he said, twisting the handle and pushing the door open. The room appeared. It was just as he'd remembered, except not. The dark wood now appeared sombre without the sun's strong light. Gloom even shrouded the bright colours of the modern art on the walls. Their bags stood to attention against the dressing table. Maya's was untouched, but Leo's was open at the top, with some clothes strewn on the floor around it. Leo looked at the bed and felt his smile drain. Although it was messy from their afternoon nap, he clearly saw that it was empty. "Hello?" Leo said loudly. He stepped into the room. The door clattered closed behind him. He looked around, as though Maya could just be obscured by some optical illusion. But the room was empty. The sides of his chest began to ache with the coming tightness. Each breath was shorter than the last. "Maya, where are you?" Leo crossed to the bathroom door. He tried to suppress the sickening feeling that had already taken hold. "You really are full of surprises," he said again, twisting the handle and pushing the door open. The bathroom came into view. The bath, shower, sink, mirror, as Leo had known it would be, in his twisting, struggling stomach. The bathroom was empty. Leo turned to look again. He must have missed something. Maybe it was one of Maya's jokes, a prank. She'd be up in one of the bars drinking cocktails and waiting for him. He would walk in, searching frantically, and she'd say something like, "You took your time, but now, as you clearly know me well enough." Leo drew a deep breath and tried to calm his racing thoughts. The oxygen in the room was thin and fraught. His lungs struggled with tiny, futile breaths. She would be in the restaurant, or the bar, or somewhere, waiting for him. Leo tumbled from the door of the cabin and onto the beach. Using the cabin's front railing, he bent and inhaled as deeply as he could. She would be somewhere. She had to be. Around him, palm trees curved in ghostly arches beyond which sea and sand wrestled playfully. Leo needed to find Maya. He pulled a breath and straightened up. He needed to find Maya. Chapter 15. Omar leant back into the chair by the window and watched the slender figure of his sleeping wife. Beneath the single sheet, he made out the curves of her body and the rise and fall of her chest. Soon, they would be able to sleep together, both drift off beside one another without the worry of being woken by bright lights and loud voices. It was funny, he realised, as he felt a soft, cool breeze from the open window behind him, what you missed when you didn't have it. That basic freedom to be able to sleep without fear of your own safety was something Omar had never thought about before, but now it was essential. Last night had been too close. That was his fault. He had been sitting in the chair and was supposed to be awake, but insidiously his heavy eyes had closed until he shook his head as the sound of heavy knuckles against the door echoed through his thoughts. If he'd not woken up immediately, then Nafisa would have been... It didn't even bear thinking about. They were so close now. Omar had been saving every baht he could. It was all stashed beneath a loose floorboard in an old tin. He calculated they were about 2 weeks from Nafisa getting the papers she needed. Once that was done, she could get a job. Then they could go for that long, promised walk on the sand. Omar pictured it now, Nafisa's almond eyes glistening as they walked together down one of the island's wide beaches. It was a dream they were close to realising. Suddenly, Omar was alert, his eyes wide in the dark room. There were footsteps on the stairs outside, he was sure of it. Leaning forward in the chair, his hands clasped together, he listened to every tick and rumble of the night. They were so close now, too close to be caught, too close to be separated, too close to be sent back. He would never let that happen. The truth was, Omar knew they had no home to go back to. Rohingya people, like Nafisa and Omar, have no home. If they dare to return to where they came from in Myanmar, they would be beaten, or worse. Omar wouldn't let that happen to his wife. He would give it all, life, limb, and freedom, to make sure she was safe. There it was again. That noise. Another footstep. Omar stood and crossed to the bed. He couldn't leave it as late as last night. He was about to shake Nafisa awake when he heard a voice. The person climbing the stairs was shouting something. Omar stepped towards the door and listened. "Maya!" came the voice again. "Maya!" Omar's brain whirled. Where had he heard that name? Who was Maya? And why was someone looking for her? Chapter 16. "Maya!" Leo shouted, walking towards the back of the resort. He'd searched all the bars and restaurants and found no sign of her. His idea, his hope, that Maya would just be sat in a bar waiting for him had been dashed to shreds. She could have gone somewhere further. There was a beach bar in every bay on the island. But why would she do that? A darker thought shimmered as Leo reached the resort's perimeter fence. He pushed the thought away. For now, he wasn't going to entertain it. This was a stupid prank. She had to be here somewhere. Very soon, she'd emerge from a shadow and laugh at Leo's anxiety. He needed to find her. Leo needed to find her. Beyond the perimeter fence, the impenetrable jungle sung with the chatter of insects. There was no way Maya would have gone in there. Leo turned and looked back the way he'd come. The lights in the restaurant were now switched off, and although faint music skipped from the beachfront bar, that was almost empty too. This place was supposed to be relaxing. They'd booked somewhere luxurious to give themselves a chance to recover before going home. And now this. Leo felt his eyes tingle as emotion ran through him. Of all the things he'd expected tonight, this was not one of them. Why would Maya do this to him? He shook his head in an attempt to suppress his rising emotion. Right now he needed to stay practical. He was going to find Maya. Leo looked around again. There must be somewhere he'd not checked. To the right, he noticed a passage between the buildings. It was narrow and gloomy. It wasn't easily recognisable. Edging towards it, Leo peered in. Staff only was printed on the wall beside it. That's exactly the sort of place Maya would go, Leo thought, stepping into the shadow. The passage was thin and decrepit in comparison to the rest of the resort. Paint peeled from the walls, a row of air conditioners whirred and ticked. "Maya, are you down here?" Leo shouted. A dirty curtain on the first floor twitched. Leo didn't care who saw him or what they thought. He needed to find Maya. He climbed a set of wooden stairs. At the top, a row of doors opened into what must be staff accommodation. Maybe Maya had helped with this crazy surprise of hers. "Are you here, Maya?" Leo said, quieter this time. To the right, the jungle loomed. From within it, something howled and then scurried. Leo froze to the spot, his eyes searching for the noise's source. "Maya, this isn't funny." Leo stopped, mid-sentence, as a door down the landing opened. With a sharp inhale, Leo rushed towards it. Could that be Maya? "Mr. Leo, all this shoutings. What seems to be the problem?" Leo saw a dark shape step from the door and turn to face him. Seeing the bright half-disc of a smile, Leo recognised Omar. Chapter 17. "Okay, that is not good at all," Omar said, nodding solemnly. "I'll just go and get my things, then I'll help you look. We will find her, never you worry." Omar stepped back into the room, and Leo heard some whispered words. Omar reappeared and then led them down the stairs back towards the resort. "Where did you say you've checked?" Omar said, turning to face Leo. Leo ran through the places he'd looked and the people he'd asked. Omar nodded and led them off in the direction of the resort's far end. Leo and Omar searched systematically from one headland to the other. They checked every place Maya could possibly have gone. But there was nothing. No sign of her. She'd just disappeared. As they checked around the reception area for the second time, Leo slumped to a wall. "She's got to be somewhere," Omar said, positively, rushing over to sit beside Leo. "Don't worry, we'll find her." "I've searched everywhere around here," Leo said, noticing a pair of tyre tracks in the gravel. "She must have gone somewhere. We've been up half the night already, and you've got work tomorrow." "Work is no problem when someone needs help," Omar said, his smile growing. "I really appreciate your help," Leo said, now facing him, "but she's not here. I think I need to call the police." Omar's smile evaporated. No, that is a very bad idea. The police, She's disappeared. She's not here. If she's been taken against her will," Leo's stomach bubbled at the thought, "then the sooner we report it, the better." "I think," Omar stuttered, looking at his feet, "I think it is better to wait until the morning. You never know, she may just come back. Maybe she's gone to a party in another town." "I doubt that," Leo said, thinking of his proposal and the last words Maya said to him. "Then you'll get your answer." "Yes, that is definitely the best way. Wait until the morning and then if needing, call the police then," Omar said. "Okay," Leo nodded at Omar, whose smile had returned, but without its previous glow. "Thank you for your help tonight," Leo said, climbing to his feet. "That is no problem. Anything you need, Omar can help. Well, I will try and help, anyway." Leo tried to smile, but failed. He made his way back towards the cabin, on the path where Omar had revealed the bay to them less than 24 hours ago. Leo paused. The two headlands were now shrouded in darkness, but the beach and jetty shimmered beneath hanging lights. This should have been the perfect night, but now Leo was returning to the cabin, alone. Leo pushed open the door and slumped to the bed with his head in his hands. The room's dark walls seemed to draw in closer. They were trapping Leo with his raging thoughts. Leo couldn't escape the more sinister theories that now pulsated through his mind. Maya could have been taken against her will. In an attempt to purge the idea, Leo sat up straight and snapped on the light. He pulled a deep breath and looked around the room. Maya was probably just shocked by his proposal and needed a bit of space. She would be having a drink in another bar somewhere on the island. This was his fault. He shouldn't just have thrown that on her. How could I have thought? His mind jarred to a stop as he saw something glimmer on the bedside table. His eyes focused and confirmed what it was. Placed carefully on the bedside table, diamonds facing forward, Leo saw Maya's engagement ring. Chapter 18. The night brought little sleep for Omar. Lying awake, staring at the ceiling as Nafisa kept watch, he couldn't help but think about the missing girl. He hoped she would turn up by the morning. He knew that tourists did these sort of things. They came and they went as they pleased without telling anyone. That was normal for them. That was why they were here. But the more he thought about it, The more the knot in his stomach told him that was unlikely. The man, Leo, had seemed so upset by it, so convinced that something bad had happened to her. Omar stole a glance at Nafisa, sat in the chair by the window with the book open on her lap. How she could read in just the ambient light through the window, he had no idea. Maybe they should just go now. They had enough money to get them somewhere else, where the police inspections were less frequent and less violent. But Omar had a job here. They had a real chance of happiness if they could just get Nafisa's papers sorted. Omar exhaled. His eyes lost focus on the ceiling's web of cracks. He knew one thing for certain. If the girl didn't turn up by the morning, Leo would call the police. And the police looking around was never a good thing. Chapter 19. "Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful," Maya says, glancing from Leo to the ring and back again. The diamonds sparkle in her large dark eyes. Her smile is currency the world over. Leaning over, she picks up the ring and examines it in the day's fading light. Leo hadn't seen it for weeks, but now, with its colour refracting, it looks perfect. Just perfect. "Come to our room in 5 minutes," Maya says, her hand closing around the ring as she gets to her feet. "Then you'll get your answer." Leo watches her turn and walk towards the beach. He watches the movement ripple across her body, the body he wants to wake up next to day after day. That's so typical of Maya, he thinks, as her silhouette grows small against the lights on the shore, doing things her way. Morning light streamed through the cabin's glass door as Leo opened his eyes. His head ached as though he'd been drinking, but he knew this was much worse. For a few moments he lay still and let his mind process the events of the previous night. If Maya didn't turn up, then Leo didn't know how things could ever be normal again. Life without Maya. Maya was gone. But was she? Maybe this was all part of her plan. Maybe she would be there on the end of the jetty when he came out of the cabin. She'd be waiting for him, her eyes sparkling like the morning light, shimmering like the tropical sea. Leo sat up, turned and planted his feet on the floor. That's where she'd be. He knew it. She would be there just waiting for him, smiling in that way that said, "I do things my way." Leo crossed to the door and rubbed a hand across his face and through his hair. Then he grasped the door handle and pictured Maya. She would be standing there now, waiting for him. She'd probably been there all morning. In fact, Leo would put money on the fact she never left the resort. Maybe she just stayed in the cabin next door and ignored his calls. This was just her way of saying, "I do things my way." Leo pulled a deep breath, forced a smile, and yanked open the door. The bright morning light stung his eyes. He went out onto the deck and looked around. The freshly raked sand of the beach shone, and the breeze ruffled the palm fronds. Leo squinted towards the jetty. He couldn't see a thing. He held his hands above his eyes in an effort to cut out the blinding sun. That's where Maya would be. He knew it, waiting there, her eyes glistening like diamonds, smiling in that way that said, "I do things my way." Leo couldn't see anything. The morning was too bright. There were moving shapes on the jetty, but whether one of them was Maya, he couldn't tell. Leo ran towards the jetty. He still wore yesterday's clothes. The hot sand stung his feet. He stopped at the water's edge and looked again. The jetty was a kaleidoscope of silhouettes in the low morning sun. Is one of those silhouettes Maya? Leo felt his pulse race with the intoxicating possibility. Leo ran through the surf and leapt up onto the jetty's wooden surface. Ignoring the protests of pain from the soles of his feet, he ran. Maya had to be there. This was so her. This was totally Maya. So totally Maya. You have news, Mr. Leo?" came the voice as Leo approached the silhouette at the end of the jetty. As the figure came into focus, Leo recognised Omar's slender limbs. The young man was draping the chairs in fresh fabrics. "Well, with all that running here, it looks like you have news." Leo squinted against the sun and made out Omar's trademark smile, a smile which began to fade with Leo's lack of response. I know. Have you seen her?" Leo replied. Omar's smile drained "No, I haven't. I'm afraid not." Omar looked at the floor. Then his hands clenched into fists. "I'm going to have to," Leo said, squinting at the other man. "Yes," Omar said. "You must call the police. The receptionist will do it for you. They have a phone there." Chapter 20. Inspector Kea stretched his legs beneath the table as he watched the clock shudder past 9 a.m. Back in Bangkok, he would have already been to the gym by now, led the morning briefing at the station, and probably already be out on the road. Kea liked being out on the road. That was where the real police work was done. Not in offices, to the sound of rattling keyboards, but in the real world. He took a tub of cow tom soup from the bag on the floor and snapped off the lid. Life was easier now, though, he supposed. That was a good thing. As steam rose from the bowl, Kea inhaled greedily. Cow tom was his favourite, and now his usual breakfast. Kea dug the spoon deep into the soup and raised it to his lips. The fragrance of the seafood, coriander, Thai celery made his mouth water. His Adam's apple bobbed beneath rolls of flesh. He opened his mouth and lifted the spoon slowly, with the speed of a tantric dancer. He was going to enjoy this first mouthful. "Boss! Boss!" Deng rushed into the office and collided with a small filing cabinet. He hopped on one leg and a mound of papers slipped to the floor. Kea's usually steady hand shook with this unexpected noise. The broth spilt down the front of his shirt. "What is it?" he growled, dropping the spoon back into the cow tom soup and grabbing a napkin. Deng continued to hop around the office. The displaced papers scattered further in the draft caused by his movement. We've, he stuttered between breaths and clutched his shin. "We've got a case, a real case." Kea spat on the napkin and dabbed again at the yellow splotch on his shirt. It didn't seem to be coming off. "What?" he said, as Deng's words registered. "A real case?" "Yes," Deng said, finally standing still. "So, someone's lost their phone again?" Kea said, abandoning the clean-up and fixing Deng with two bloodshot eyes. "No, it's better than that," Deng said, grinning. "Well, tell me." "A missing person," Deng said, expressively. "Right, give me the details." Kea struggled to his feet. Deng pulled a small notebook from his pocket and read out the few notes he'd made during the phone call with the resort's receptionist. Then, almost in a panic, he started looking around his desk. "What are you doing now?" Kea asked. "The board, sir," Deng said, pointing up at the blank whiteboard. "This is a case. We need to write it on the board." "Oh, for God's sake, leave that," Kea said, grabbing the keys to the police cruiser and throwing them to Deng. "We need to get there. You're driving. I haven't had breakfast yet." Chapter 21. The breakfast buffet was being cleared away as Leo took a table at the back of the restaurant. The thought of food right now made Leo's stomach bubble. He couldn't eat, knowing Maya was out there somewhere. He should have something, though. He needed to have something. He ordered a coffee by way of compromise and settled into a seat. 10 minutes ago, the receptionist had called the police. Leo had listened without understanding the conversation. After hanging up, she said the police would meet him in the restaurant. A group of 4 young backpackers were the only other people in the restaurant. They sat overlooking the beach. Leo could hear the flurry of their conversation over the clatter of the kitchen, but couldn't make out any actual words. Nothing seemed to permeate the haze of his despair. Quiet seemed to settle over the restaurant as 2 police officers walked in. Leo stood up and waved them over. The first man was small, quick, and probably younger than Leo. The man behind was his opposite, a lumbering mound of flesh. Both wore tightly fitting black uniforms. For the younger man, this showed a toned physique. The body of the larger officer appeared to be trying to escape at the sleeves and neck. The larger man spilled into the chair opposite Leo, grabbed a napkin from the table and dabbed at his forehead. The endeavour of walking from the car seemed to have already proved too much. He introduced himself as Inspector Kea and his colleague, Officer Deng. "Tell us what happened," Kea said. Deng sat poised with a notepad and pen. Leo described the events of the previous night, how Maya had just disappeared, how he'd searched the resort with the help of one of the staff and that she still hadn't been seen. Inspector Kea rubbed his face with his hand and then wiped it on his trousers. Deng scribbled something down. "Had you had an argument?" Kea asked. His bloodshot eyes examined Leo. "No, not at all. We're happier than ever. We just..." Kea shouted at a waiter who carried a tray of bacon back from the kitchen. After a small exchange, the waiter brought the tray of bacon over and left it on the table. "Carry on," Kea said, picking up a rasher and folding it into his mouth. "We'd had the best few weeks," Leo said, feeling his eyes begin to water. "It really had been amazing." Kea nodded as his teeth crunched over another crispy rasher. "Have you got a recent photo?" Kea asked. "Yeah, sure." Leo picked up his phone and selected one he'd taken 2 days before. Maya sat on the beach in her bikini. She smiled hypnotically. He passed the phone to Kea. Kea spoke to Deng in Thai for a minute, their eyes glimmering back and forth. "We need a copy of this," the inspector said, his eyes not moving from the picture. "Of course," Leo said. Deng took the phone and emailed the picture. "What are your plans now? How long are you staying on Koh Tao?" Kea asked. "We were supposed to leave later today." "That's a shame," Kea said. "Such a beautiful island, so much to do." Leo looked at the man. Having finished the bacon, Kea licked the fat from his fingers. "Don't you worry about this," Kea said. "I'm one of the Thai police force's greatest inspectors. I will find what happened to your girlfriend. We will make all the checks today, and I guarantee you we will have some news soon. Here's my number." Kea passed Leo a business card. "If you remember anything that might be useful, call me. Also, Deng will take your number now." And with that, the large man forced himself to his feet and wobbled in the direction of the kitchen door. Leo pushed open the cabin door and looked around the gloomy room. This was supposed to have been a beautiful place for them to end their travels. The room should have been ringing with the confessions of their love. Leo slumped to the bed. The perfect end to the holiday of a lifetime lay in ruins. The interview with the self-proclaimed greatest inspector in the Thai police force had taken less than 20 minutes. Leo thought through the questions Inspector Kea had asked. No, he had no idea where she'd gone. If he knew, surely he would have just gone and found her himself. No, she gave no indication that she was planning to leave. No, they'd not had an argument. Yes, Leo was sure that he didn't know where she'd gone. Leo put his head in his hands. It felt like his brain was rotting from the inside out. The dull ache he'd felt that morning had now developed into something that thudded behind his eyes. He pinched the bridge of his nose. As the walls of the cabin began to spin, Leo decided he needed some outside air. He looked at the cabin door. Maybe a walk would do him good. Leo saw a man and woman walk past the cabin. It was Inspector Kea's final question that hung most prominently in Leo's thoughts. What was he planning to do now? What should he do now? Was there anything he could do now? Inspector Kea had assured Leo they would make the usual checks. Leo imagined that included hospitals, records of people leaving the island, but could they be trusted to do that? Could he check these things too? Leo forced himself to his feet and stepped out onto the cabin's decking. He narrowed his eyes against the sun and looked up and down the beach. The couple who had passed the cabin were now standing in the shallow water and gazing out to sea. The man had his arms around the woman as they watched the rippling waves. Leo closed his eyes tight. That should have been him and Maya. Leo knew he needed to stay on the island a few more days, just to make sure the police were doing something and to be there if, however unlikely it felt, Maya came back. Chapter 22. Mr. Sahin rolled up the sleeves of his discoloured shirt above his elbows and narrowed his eyes. Age was either catching up with his vision or his computer was on the blink. He squinted further, but the text on the screen still jumped and twisted. The door opened. More air seemed to leave the room as Mr. Sahin saw the large frame of Inspector Kea fill the doorway. "I need a list of all your staff now," Kea said, turning sideways and stepping into the office. The hotelier squinted from the screen to the inspector and back again. "What's this concerning?" Sahin said. "I have no obligation to tell you," Kea replied, "but in this case, I will. One of your guests has disappeared, and we're treating it as very suspicious. I need a list of all the staff you have working here right now." Mr. Sahin's eyes widened with the implied allegation. Bad things happening to guests always had bad repercussions for a hotel. Sometimes it was just the reduction in trade as future customers read about a fellow tourist's demise at the resort. In the worst cases, though, if a hotel was proved to have been at fault, they could be forced to close. "Yes, of course, Inspector," Sahin said, turning back to the computer and pulling up the list. "We're going to examine this list in the restaurant today," Kea said, as the printer in the corner began to grumble. "I trust we have your full cooperation." Sahin agreed, grabbed the papers from the printer and passed them to the inspector. Inspector Kea ran his finger down the list and nodded. The movement sent great ripples through his cheeks. "Thank you. Your cooperation will be noted. We will start looking through this now." Mr. Sahin took a deep breath as the inspector turned to leave. "Also," Kea said, spinning with a poise contradictory to his size, "we will need coffee and cake brought to our table." Chapter 23. For Omar, the day passed slowly. The tasks that he normally found consumed him, welcoming guests to the resort, showing them to their rooms, serving in the restaurant, were just mere physical actions. Omar wouldn't have noticed, but his smile had lost its shine too. Still, he showed all he met his broad, glimmering smile, but it didn't have its usual radiance. Pulling the sheet from the bed in one of the cabins, which had just been vacated by an American couple, Omar looked around the room. The walls of the cabin, like all the others, were dark wood, highlighted by modern art of colours and shapes. What would it be like, he thought, unfolding the clean sheet and tucking it over the thick, sumptuous mattress, to stay somewhere like this? Maybe one day he would be able to take Nafisa to a hotel. They could stay a few nights and have people look after them for a change. Although for now, Omar thought, laying out a purple blanket, he would be more than satisfied with a walk on the beach. Omar heard the door open. He turned to face it and saw two figures silhouetted against the bright light of the beach. It took him a few moments to recognise the men. Police officers. The larger of the two dabbed at his face with a napkin. The smaller stepped towards Omar. "Hello, sirs," Omar said, feigning a smile which never made it as far as his eyes. "If you'd like to see my papers, I don't have them on me right now." The officer stepped closer to Omar. He was slimmer than the other officer who waited by the door. He looked strong, though. A taut body rippled beneath his tight-fitting shirt. Omar's Adam's apple bobbed, and the man's eyes glimmered darkly. "The papers, they're in my room," Omar said, dropping the towel he'd been rolling. I'll go and get them for you right now. You just wait here." Omar moved towards the door. The lean officer stepped to block his path. The officer standing at the door dabbed his reddened face again. "It'll be no bother, no trouble at all," Omar twittered on, his hands clasped together. Omar didn't see the smaller officer move, but somehow he knew it was coming. Deng pushed Omar against the wall. Omar slammed hard into the wood. Paintings bounced upon his impact. One of them clattered to the floor, its glass smashing. Omar tried to speak, tried to protest. The words wouldn't come. Then the officer pulled him away from the wall, spun him around and pushed him face first into the wood. Omar felt the wall's rough surface on his cheek. He tried to struggle, but his hands were twisted behind his back and cuffed. Only then did the officer speak. "Now, make sure you do exactly as we say," Deng whispered malevolently into Omar's ear. "You wouldn't want to get hurt, would you?" Chapter 24. "Mr. Keane." Leo turned in his chair in an attempt to see the owner of the flamboyant voice. "Mr. Keane, I am most glad you've come in today." A small man Leo had never seen before rushed over to his table. The man wore a long, faded shirt beneath a grey, shapeless suit. The size and decay of his outfit gave the impression the clothes had been borrowed by a much larger man. "I am Mr. Sahin, the manager here. I wanted to say that we are all so sorry to hear about your girlfriend. Such a terrible thing. Especially such a terrible thing to be happening here." Leo nodded, then looked at the menu on the table. Mr. Sahin's gaze was uncomfortable. "We really shouldn't be having things like this happening in our hotel," Mr. Sahin continued. "You know what I'm saying?" Leo nodded again, then spun the menu on the table in front of him. He really didn't feel like eating, but knew that he should. "I want you and everyone else to know that we are going to do everything we can to help you, Mr. Keane. Should you want to extend your stay? Just in case should you want to extend your stay, I will reserve one of our excellent rooms for you." Leo looked up at the man. He had just spent an hour rebooking his flight so that he could stay on the island. To Leo's surprise, the flight operator had actually been understanding. They said they would get him on the next available flight at no extra cost when he was ready to return home. "I will reserve it, and of course," Mr. Sahin stuttered as though he found the words painful, there will be no cost to you." Leo nodded again. "And of course your drinks and food?" Mr. Sahin's neck seemed to strain as he swallowed. "They'll be included too. We will look after you, Mr. Keene, in your difficult time." "Thank you," Leo said, finally looking up at the man. "I will be staying a few more days. I'd like to stay in the same cabin if possible, just in case she comes back." Mr. Sahin's hands tensed and he stood up a little straighter. That will be..." Mr. Sahin swallowed, then cleared his throat. "I was going to suggest one of our first-class beautiful rooms." Leo continued to look at the man. Mr. Sahin ran his hand through his thin hair and coughed again. Finally, he nodded at Leo. Of course, though, if you want to stay in the cabin, we will do anything we can to help you at your difficult time." "Thank you," Leo said again, flipping the menu. "Could I get you anything now?" Leo looked around at the other diners. 2 couples sat overlooking the darkening beach. Leo had chosen the shady back corner because he didn't want to look at the jetty or the cabin. "Yes," Leo looked at Mr. Sahin. "Tell me, where is Omar tonight? I want to thank him for his help. He was so kind last night." Mr. Sahin stuttered as his face drained of colour. Leo felt his hunger sink further. "You don't know?" Mr. Sahin said, finally getting control of himself. His hands rubbed together as though trying to wipe themselves clean. "Don't know what?" Leo shook his head. I thought the police would have told you," Mr. Sahin said. His voice dropped to a whisper and he leant in close to Leo. "He's been arrested. They think he was involved in Maya's disappearance," Leo said, finishing the manager's sentence as his jaw became slack. Chapter 25. One of the first things Omar had liked about Koh Tao, one of the things that drew him to want to stay on the island, was the smell. Sure, the crisp, sandy beaches were beautiful, the weather was temperate, and the food, what scraps of it he and Nafisa ate, was good. But the smell was so interesting, so unique and appealing. Omar thought about that smell now as he tried to steady himself. He pulled a big lungful of oxygen and imagined that smell. The wet jungle smell of the big-leaved plants after a rainstorm, the saline tickle of the sea in your nostrils, the tantalising odour of the food, lime, lemongrass and spices. He couldn't smell that now, though. The room was stiflingly hot. The only breeze came through the barred, glassless window behind him. Omar inhaled, and he felt a gust tickle the back of his neck. If he could just get a taste of the island, then maybe he'd be able to convince himself that things would be okay. Things had to be okay. The waft didn't bring the smell that Omar longed for, though. Just the acidic spike of rotting rubbish with a faint undercurrent of hot sewage. Omar glanced around the room. The brick walls shrugged off their grey paint and fingers of rust spiralled through the thick iron door. Another breath of the warm stench floated through the window behind him. Omar had been in the room at least 2 hours. There was no way he could know for sure, as there was no clock. He couldn't see the position of the sun, and he'd never owned a watch. The officers hadn't even spoken to him on the drive here, or as they bundled him from the car into the police station. Omar had a feeling that was coming, though. Omar would have to explain that it was all just some big misunderstanding. He hadn't done anything. He could show them his papers and straighten this all out. The police officers would understand that, wouldn't they? Mr. Sahin would be really angry, though. Omar knew that. Omar swallowed. His throat felt like sand. Footsteps echoed from somewhere else in the building. A door opened and the sound of a pop song on the radio floated into the bleak room. Omar knew the song and mouthed the words in an attempt to improve his mood. He winced at the pain from his cracked lips. It was all just a misunderstanding. They'd get it sorted out soon. They had to. But what if it wasn't? What if it just couldn't be sorted out? Omar's stomach tightened. He looked down at his hands, shackled to a thick metal loop on the tabletop, and thought about Nafisa. He wasn't worried about himself. They could do what they liked to him, but not Nafisa. Straining against his bindings, Omar managed to glance out of the window. If Nafisa could get away, She would almost have enough money for the immigration papers. But if she was caught and sent back, Omar felt himself grow dizzy. There was no way he could let that happen. He would rather die. He would rather die than let that happen. Lying on the bed in their room, a tatty copy of The Beach open on her lap, Nafisa looked out of the window. As always, the day was fraught and hot. Nafisa couldn't wait until she was able to go out there and experience it. Omar had said that would happen soon, just a couple more weeks. Then they'd have all the money they needed for her papers. Nafisa picked up the book and looked at the yellow pages. So far, as she understood it, it was about a guy travelling in Thailand and looking for a really nice beach. Although reading in English was a challenge for her, the book itself didn't seem to make a lot of sense. Walk half a mile in any given direction and you'd find a beach. Why this need to swim through an ocean or follow a secret map? It didn't matter though, she told herself. She didn't need to think about it that closely. Just enjoy the story. Nafisa looked out of the window again and wondered how long it would be before Omar got back. She looked forward to her husband's return every day. Even now, thinking about opening the door on his beaming smile, she felt a flutter of excitement. The sun was still high though. It would be a few hours yet. Maybe she should try and finish the book before Omar returned. Her eyes focused and her brow furrowed. Then she'd have something good to tell him. Chapter 26. Leo sat in the restaurant and watched the manager shift his weight from one foot to the other. How could the police arrest Omar for this? Firstly, Leo knew that there was no real indication Maya hadn't gone on her own. Secondly, Omar had given up most of his night's sleep to help Leo look for her. The man had been genuinely concerned for them both. And, worst of all, how had they come to this conclusion and not told Leo about it? They'd not even mentioned they suspected Maya had been abducted or killed, let alone told Leo they were planning to make an arrest. "Thank you for telling me," Leo said, looking back up at Mr. Sahin. "That's surprising, as I only reported it to them a few hours ago. What made them suspect Omar?" Mr. Sahin wobbled his head in a way that was neither yes nor no. "Thai police, very good, very quick. No matter the problem, they will sort it." Leo watched the red-faced hotelier as an uncomfortable sense raged inside him. Of course he wanted to know what happened to Maya. He needed to know what happened to Maya. But arresting an innocent man wouldn't help. "Where's the police station?" Leo asks. Mr. Sahin flushed further. "I don't think you need to go—" "Where is it?" Leo asked again, his voice serrated. He needed to talk to the police now, and, if possible, he needed to talk to Omar too. "I need to go." Now it was Mr. Sahin's turn to break Leo's insistent stare. "I'll drive you," he said. Chapter 27. Omar heard footsteps approach the door of his cell and turned from his attempts to look through the window. Based on the time of his arrest, Omar estimated it must be some time in the late afternoon. He was thirsty. He hadn't had anything to drink since waking up. It was still early though. That was good. Nafisa wouldn't be expecting him back for a while yet. Maybe by then, all of this misunderstanding would have been ironed out. Maybe. A heavy key grated in the lock and the door grunted open. Omar pinned the most disarming smile he could muster across his face. The thinner officer, the man who'd cuffed Omar earlier, entered first and then stood aside for the other. The larger officer was sweating profusely and dark rings now bracketed his underarms. The larger officer pulled out one of the chairs opposite Omar, slumped down into it and banged something to the table. As the man removed his large, moist hand from the object, Omar saw that it was a can of drink. It was cold too. Moisture mottled the surface. Omar began to salivate. He tore his eyes away and looked at the officer. "I really hope this won't take long," the senior officer said. "It's so hot in here." He dug through a trouser pocket for his handkerchief. It would once have been white, but now was stained with various blotches. The chair beneath him squeaked in protest at his movements. The younger officer nodded and narrowed his eyes on Omar. Omar's smile began to melt. "Oh, I bought you something," the big man said, pushing the can of drink towards Omar's shackled hand. Omar's thirst grew. "Go on, have it. You must be really thirsty having been in here for so long." Omar reached out for the can, only to realise the handcuffs stopped him an inch too short. The big man's face twisted into a smirk. "Ah, what? You don't want it?" the man said, reaching over and picking up the can. "That's pretty ungrateful, isn't it?" He turned to the other officer, who nodded and sniggered. The larger officer then placed the can back on the table, closer this time. Omar reached out and grabbed it. The cold metal felt good against his skin. He imagined himself snapping it open and taking a sip. He moved his hands around the can to open it, but the cuffs bit again. Try as he might, Omar couldn't raise one hand high enough to open the can. The officer's wry grin morphed into a yellow-toothed smile. "It would be easier without those, wouldn't it?" he said, pointing at the handcuffs. "I'll get Deng here to unlock you, if you just answer one question for me." Omar looked at the man. "What happened to the girl?" Omar's thirst disappeared. He let go of the can. "We know," the big man said, snatching the can from the table, "what animals like you do to pretty women like that. And I'm not sure I blame you. They walk around the place, showing all their..." He made the shape of a woman's body with his hands and licked his lips. "It's difficult for us all." The big man opened his legs a little wider. I don't know anything about a girl going missing," Omar said. "I have my papers to show you if you need..." "I don't care about the papers." Man slammed the can down on the table. "I care about the woman you dragged down to the beach last night. And I care about what you did to her." I've done nothing. I don't know anything about the woman." "Okay," the big man said. Then answer this. Last night you helped Mr. Keane look for his missing girlfriend, correct?" Omar nodded. "I was just trying to be helpful." "Who were you with before that?" "No one." Omar paused for a microsecond. "I was in my room, alone." The big man snapped the can open. A spray of carbonated drink exploded from it and dripped onto the floor. "In your room, alone," he said. "All night?" Omar nodded. "Okay," the big man said. Without touching the can to his lips, he poured a torrent of the drink into his mouth. Omar watched and couldn't help but imagine the cooling sensation. "Okay," he said after swallowing. "Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Deng?" He slid the can along the table to the younger officer. "Give our friend some of this. He must be really thirsty." Omar smiled. Maybe that was all they needed. "Sure," Deng said, laying down the pen he'd been using to take notes. Deng got to his feet, picked up the can, and walked behind Omar. Omar tilted his head back and opened his mouth. He expected to feel the cool nourishment of the drink at any moment. Deng tipped the can, and a cool finger of drink streamed into Omar's mouth. He felt it cooling him. It revitalized him. It was all just some kind of misunderstanding. There was no need to worry. Then something cold and hard exploded across Omar's face. His nose cracked and his eyes stung. Deng withdrew the can from Omar's face. The can was dented and almost empty. Then he brought it down again, hard across Omar's nose. Blood and drink covered Omar's face. Mixing together, they dripped down over his body. Instinctively, Omar tried to lift his hands. The cuffs bit. He cried in pain and leant forward to get the liquid from his eyes. Blood pooled on the table. "You killed her," the big man said, standing up. "You killed her, and you will go down for it." Bent double across the table, Omar didn't see the elbow coming to the side of his head. Then the room went dark. Chapter 28. Years ago, whilst at university, Leo had made the decision to be a journalist. He devoured the autobiographies of war correspondents, political reporters and documentary filmmakers and thought a life in the media was his opportunity to do something meaningful. He would report on history being made, hold the authorities to account and celebrate mankind's success. He scored a job at a local paper, the Brighton Echo, shortly after graduation and believed he was well on the way. He planned to stay at the paper a few years, get some good stories under his belt and then move to a national or even an international company. That wasn't the way it had worked out, though. Amid falling circulation, the paper had been sold, then sold again. The number of staff shrank, and Leo found he was covering everything he could do to fill the pages of their weekly publication. But as Sahin slowed the orange Jeep, Leo felt something of the excitement he'd longed for in the job many years ago. Something here wasn't right. He knew it. Sure, he'd asked the police to help him understand what had happened to Maya, and they'd arrested someone. But Omar... "I'll wait for you here," Mr. Sahin said, indicating a parking space beside a dusty, white and blue police car. Leo stepped out of the Jeep. The intensity of the afternoon sun was dazzling. Omar, the smiling man who'd picked them up yesterday, the man who'd helped Leo last night, could not be involved in Maya's disappearance. Some innate sense told Leo that that just wasn't right. Of course, Leo wanted to know what happened to Maya. He needed to know. He needed to know the truth. But letting an innocent man take the fall just wasn't okay. Leo glanced back at the Jeep, emblazoned with the name of the resort, and thought about the last 24 hours. Today should have been a day of celebration, a day for Leo and Maya to revel in their new commitment to one another. At least, that's what Leo had hoped. Then, as he stepped beneath the shade of the police station's tin roof, he felt an anxiety within him. Was he really going to interfere with a police investigation? He took a deep breath of the dusty afternoon air and banished the thought. He had to. He had to know for sure. Inside, the police station was drab and bleak. The walls of the small reception area were covered in public information posters which Leo couldn't read. From the ceiling, a fan spun lackadaisically, and somewhere in the building a Thai pop song played on the radio. A small desk was arranged in front of a door at the room's far side. Leo crossed to it and peered through. The sound of movement echoed from somewhere within the station. "Hello?" Leo said. The sound of movement was now joined by a mechanical groan. "Hello?" Leo said again. Rounding the desk, Leo peered through the door. "I'm here to speak with..." He heard a ping and the mechanical groan stopped. A woman appeared from the door carrying a steaming bowl of noodles. "Hi," Leo said, smiling at her. The woman took a seat behind the desk and looked up at Leo. She had a strong jawline and dark, straight hair. Leo estimated she was in her middle age, though he couldn't be sure. "I'm here to speak with Officers Kaya and Deng," Leo said slowly. The woman gestured for Leo to sit and picked up the phone. She held the handset in one hand and slurped her noodles with the other. "Yes, we've arrested a man," Inspector Kaya said, barely glancing up as Leo was shown into the room by Officer Deng. 2 desks were positioned next to each other. Each contained piles of paperwork, a heavy-looking laptop computer, a phone, and a bowl of steaming noodles. Inspector Kaya's great shoulders hunched over as he shoveled the noodles into his mouth. He held a pair of chopsticks dexterously in his thick hand. Eventually, although no invite was given, Leo sat down on one of the plastic chairs against the wall opposite. Deng took up position behind his desk and began to eat too. "Yes, I know you have," Leo said, shifting his weight around. Neither officer looked up. "He doesn't have anything to do with it, though." Kaya glanced up at Leo, a string of noodles hanging from his lips. Deng looked up too, first at Leo and then at his superior officer. Kaya plucked the final few noodles from the bowl, then raised it to his lips and slurped down the sauce. A thin line of liquid ran down his chin and pooled on the front of his shirt. Leo looked away. When the bowl had been well and truly emptied, Kaya dropped the chopsticks, wiped a chunky hand across his mouth, and considered Leo. "Mr. Keane, we're a very professional police force here. The people of Koh Tao are proud of us, you know. We solve every crime." Deng laid down his chopsticks and listened intently. He nodded at the words of his superior officer. "I'm not saying..." Leo tried to interject. He didn't want the officers to think that he was patronising them. "I realise," Kaya continued, "it is tempting for tourists who come here to get drunk and have a nice time to think they're better than us. I'm not..." Leo tried to interject again. "I know you want to find out what happened to your girlfriend, but the truth is," Kaya said as he sat up straight and put his elbows on the table, "the sea currents around this island are very strong. The truth is, her body may never be found." Leo felt his mouth open. He was still working on the assumption that she had just chosen to go for reasons unknown, not that she was... That was unthinkable. "The best thing to do is leave us to do our jobs. We are very good. We will not stop until justice has been served." "But I don't think..." The humidity, temperature, and the suggestion that Maya had been murdered caused Leo's head to throb. "I don't think the man you've arrested can have done it." Deng's eyes roamed from Leo to Kea and back again. "And why do you think this, Mr. Keene?" Kea exhaled slowly. "For one, the man spent hours helping me look. A clear sign of a guilty person. And he was working the whole night. We have 1 hour unaccounted for." It just can't be him," Leo said. "He was so warm and so kind. I know it sounds stupid, but it just can't be him." "You have our assurance, Mr. Keene, that we will prove it's him and he will face trial. We're already close to getting a confession today. He will be moved on tonight's ferry to the prison on Koh Samui while we investigate further." "Can I speak with him?" Leo asked. "That way, I should be able to tell for sure." "Not possible," Kea said, shaking his head. Deng mirrored his senior's actions. "Just for a couple of minutes, that's all I'd need." "I'm sorry, it's just not possible," Kea said. "Only official police officers may speak with prisoners. That's a rule. It just cannot be broken. Absolutely no way." "No way," Deng repeated. Leo was dejected. He couldn't overrule the police force, whatever his instincts told him. "Take my card," Kea said, slipping a card from a plastic holder on the desk and passing it to Leo. Leo took it, an oily thumbprint smudged across the name. "If you have any more questions, please let us know. And be reassured that we are working hard to make sure the evil man who probably killed your girlfriend will face justice." Leo took out his wallet, opened it, and slid the card next to the one Inspector Kea had given him a few hours ago. Inspector Kea's dark eyes narrowed on the notes in Leo's wallet. "You say," Kea said, "you'd like to speak to the prisoner?" Leo looked up at him in surprise. A moment ago he'd said there was absolutely no way. "Well, there is a special circumstance in which, if the superior officer thinks it's essential to the case, then a witness can speak with the accused." "It could really help in this case," Deng said, nodding like the village idiot. It took Leo a few moments to understand what Kea was suggesting, and when he finally did understand, a few more to believe it. Was he really going to bribe a police officer? "Yes, I think the law states that if it's essential to the investigation," Kea said, a thick hand outstretched. Leo drew a breath. He would just have to do it. He slid 100 bahts from his wallet and placed it in Kea's greasy palm. The note was pocketed with the sleight of hand of a magician or a conman. "But only if there's a real important need," Kea said again, nodding slowly. Leo took out 2 more notes. They disappeared in the same way as the last. Kea's hand stretched out again. This time, Leo scooped up all the money from his wallet, most of it in notes of low derivatives, and slid them into the police officer's greedy palm. "Officer Deng, take this witness to the prisoner, please," Kea said in a loud official tone. "It is essential to the investigation that they speak." In a whisper, he added, "Give them 10 minutes." Deng climbed to his feet and Leo followed. Leo had just bribed a police officer. After the door clattered shut behind his junior officer and the witness, Kea pulled out the notes. He flattened them lovingly against the table and slid them into his wallet. Then, seeing Deng's bowl of noodles half full, he swapped it for the empty one and began to eat. Chapter 29. Nafisa's worries grew as the sun curved its way towards the ocean. Every day since they'd been here, Omar had come back to see her at some point in the afternoon. Usually just after lunchtime, she would hear his rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat knocking on the door. She always said that he didn't need to come back. She would be fine the whole day on her own. But Omar would turn his radiating smile on her, and she would be glad that he was there. Looking down at the book, now closed on the bed beside her, Nafisa thought of the story she'd just completed. It troubled her, actually. It was, as far as she could understand, about a group of people who found themselves living on a tropical island. But, far from the paradise it was supposed to be, they all end up being horrible to each other. Nafisa could never understand why people would consciously hurt one another. Omar and herself had been forced from their home at the hands of people being needlessly cruel. The constant inspections by the local police now they were here seemed pointless too. So was the threat of violence that stopped them ever going back. Nafisa just couldn't understand why people were so consumed with being nasty to one another. Maybe, Nafisa thought, she just had a really simple view of the world. She didn't think she was that clever. She could only speak 4 languages, her native Rohingya, Burmese, Thai and English, and she did know some Arabic too from her childhood readings of the Quran. There must be some logical explanation that the important and well-educated men who made these decisions were aware of. To Nafisa, though, hidden in a room in a Thai hotel, it all seemed simple. The world would be a better place if people were nicer to one another. Nafisa was suddenly alert as she heard a faint thud of footsteps climbing the stairs. She knew the drill now. If they passed the door, that was no problem. If they stopped at the door and she heard Omar's knock, that was no problem. If they stopped at the door and she didn't hear the knock, then she would hide. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and started in her direction. Nafisa's muscles tensed as they neared. She was ready, wherever they might go. When they were just a few meters away, she sat up. The footsteps passed without stopping. Nafisa exhaled. They weren't coming this way, for now. Chapter 30. "You have 10 minutes, Deng said as he pulled open the thick metal door. The police station was so small that Leo could still hear the radio in the reception area. 2 female voices crooned over something which sounded like bells. Leo looked down at the police officer. Deng's dark eyes were around the level of Leo's chest, and they held a challenge. Leo had no intention of finding out what that challenge might be. The first thing Leo noticed as he stepped through the door was the smell. It hung thick and inescapable in the humid air. The next thing he noticed was the temperature. It seemed to envelope him as he stepped across the threshold. And the third thing he noticed, chained to a thick metal table in the centre, his face hanging despondent and smileless, was Omar. Omar's eyes flickered as he tried to smile. His face was swollen and his shirt was covered in blood. "Omar, what happened?" Leo said, rushing to the table and sitting opposite him. Omar didn't reply. He just looked down at his hands. "Why do they think you had something to do with Maya going missing?" Leo's eyes scanned the empty face across the table from him for any sign that he wasn't wasting his time. I have to tell you, Mr. Leo," Omar said, his voice low and without energy. Leo hung on his every word. His hands gripped the table. "I had nothing to do with Miss Maya going missing. I know nothing about where she is. If I could bring her back, if I could find her, then I absolutely would." Leo nodded with relief. It felt as though a little more air had been let into the room. He knew Omar was telling the truth. He had trusted the man on site the day before. "Why do they think you did it then?" Leo asked hurriedly. "Why have they arrested you?" Omar looked up from the table and his empty eyes glistened. Leo looked closely at his nose. It was swollen and bruised, with blood drying on his sun-darkened skin. "They think I did it because I don't have an alibi for the time she was taken. I say I was in my room alone, but I can't prove it. They think I'm lying." Omar looked down. A tear fell to the surface of the table. "And I am lying. I was not in my room alone." "Then why can't you get the person you were with to vouch for you? Then all this would be over." "Because that person," Omar took a heavy breath, "is my wife." Leo's eyebrows clinched together in confusion. "You don't understand, Mr. Leo." Omar looked up at him. "She doesn't have the papers to be in Thailand. We could only afford one set of papers, so we got mine and we've been saving up for hers. If the police find she's here, they'll deport her. I can't. Omar put his head in his hands and sobbed. For a moment Leo did nothing as the information sunk in. Then he placed his hand on the back of Omar's shoulder. "That cannot happen to her," Omar cried into the table. "I don't care what happens to me, but that cannot happen to her." "There must be a way out of this," Leo said. "No, I'm being taken to Samui later. They'll find me guilty. There's no fair trial for people like me here. Nafisa needs to get out. She needs to get out. Can you help?" Omar looked up at Leo. "Of course, whatever. Go to our room, room 7. Knock on the door like this." Omar banged a pattern on the table. "That way she'll open the door for you. Explain the situation. Tell her she needs to go. Tell her to take the money from the secret place and forget about me. Find another place where she can be happy." Leo grabbed Omar's shackled hands and looked deep into the void left by his absent smile. "I can do better than that," Leo said, climbing to his feet. "You are not going to Samui, Omar. Don't worry. I'll be back soon." Chapter 31. Nafisa looked out at the flat roof of the restaurant below their window. She knew that roof well now. Many times she had climbed across it in complete darkness and hidden herself from the police. It had happened at least once a week during their time on the island, sometimes more. But they were the lucky ones. Nafisa knew that. Omar constantly reminded them both of that. Nafisa felt herself smile at the thought of her husband. A smile which faded as she realised the sun was beginning its final descent and he was still nowhere to be seen. That really was unusual. Although he did work long days in the resort, Omar always came back at least once during the day. Sometimes he brought her food, other times he just told her something about his day. Every time he infected her with his smile. When they'd first arrived in Koh Tao and come up with their plan, Nafisa had no idea how she would be able to stay in a tiny room for several weeks. Back at home, she'd been so active. She was always doing things, but with Omar's frequent visits and never-ending kindness, it hadn't been that bad. Nafisa heard footsteps climb the stairs and turned to face the door. Maybe this is him. The footsteps reached the landing and came closer. Nafisa had become good at telling Omar's footsteps. She'd had a lot of practice. Omar had quick and meticulous steps. It was as though he was hurrying to spend every possible moment with her. She didn't think this was him. The footsteps came closer and then stopped outside the door. Nafisa's senses were alert. She listened for any sound that would tell her whether this was friend or foe. If she heard a key grating in the lock, then she would be out of the window in seconds. Her almond eyes narrowed on the door. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the windowsill. Then she heard it, quiet but distinct. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. Omar's knock. Nafisa grabbed the key from the chest of drawers and rushed for the door. She almost dropped it in her excitement. She finally disengaged the lock. Pulling it open, Nafisa's smile grew wider. Her husband was home. Then she saw the man waiting outside for her. He wasn't her husband. He wasn't her husband at all. Chapter 32. "Hi, Nafisa," Leo said as a small woman opened the door. She wore a loose-fitting black dress with a bright yellow shawl around her shoulders. Realising Leo wasn't her husband, her expression morphed from excitement to one of concern. She moved the yellow shawl up and over her head. "My name is Leo," he said slowly. "Omar has asked me to come and talk to you. Can I come in?" Nafisa looked from Leo to the door and then peered beyond him as though expecting Omar to appear. Leo tried to reassure her with a soft smile. After a few seconds, Nafisa stood aside and let him in. Leo stepped into the small room and shut the door behind him. He hoped no one had seen him slipping into the staff-only alleyway and climbing the stairs. Either way, Leo knew he wouldn't be there long. "Nafisa," Leo said, looking at the woman. She had large, expressive almond eyes which implored Leo to speak. "Omar has been arrested." Nafisa's expression dropped. Without saying anything, she sunk to the bed. "He's supposed to have been involved in the disappearance of my girlfriend. I know he didn't have anything to do with it. It happened last night, around 9 p.m. Nafisa turned her soft eyes on Leo and said, "He was with me." "Yes, that's what he told me. We were in this room talking before I fell asleep around 10. Nafisa's voice was soft and her English accented. Leo nodded. "The problem is, because you don't have the papers, he's afraid that if you tell that to the police, they'll deport you anyway." Nafisa nodded soberly. "But we're going to get you the papers now." "But how? I don't have enough money." "Omar says you have most of it already." Nafisa nodded. "How much do you need and where do you need to go?" Leo asked. "The immigration office near Mayhad," Nafisa said. "It costs 10,000 bahts." Leo grimaced. No wonder people were struggling to pay for official residency status if it cost that much. "And it closes at 5. Leo checked the time. "Okay, that gives us half an hour. Let's go now." Ignored the image of Omar being carted off to the prison on Koh Samui that scrolled through his mind. "How can we get there?" Nafisa said. "Don't worry about that," Leo replied. "I'll get us a lift." Chapter 33. "Mr. Sahin, I really do need to get there as soon as possible," Leo said as the hotel manager sauntered back over to the jeep. Driving Leo around the island all day clearly wasn't one of his priorities. Mr. Sahin unlocked the jeep and hauled himself into the driver's seat. Leo got in the passenger seat beside him. "I'm really looking forward to saying how helpful you and your staff have been in this difficult time," Leo said as the engine coughed. For an anxious moment it spluttered before catching. A cloud of black smoke spewed from the back. "We're just doing all we can for our guests," Mr. Sahin said, turning the jeep around and starting up the track in the direction of the main road. "Yes, there's just one more thing I ask of you," Leo said, glancing at the small man sat upright in the driver's seat. "Stop here!" Leo shouted. Mr. Sahin applied the brake and the jeep crunched to a stop. "What? What is it?" Nafisa appeared from the jungle beside the road. She ran across the gravel and jumped into the vehicle. "What is this?" Mr. Sahin asked. "This is the final thing I need from you," Leo said. "You are to take us to Mayhad and then to the police station. Then I'll say nothing but amazing things about your resort." Mr. Sahin looked from Leo to Nafisa. He crunched the jeep into gear and started back up the road. "But we really must hurry," Leo said, glancing at the digital clock on the dash. "The office closes in 20 minutes. "For my guests," Sahin said, punching the accelerator to the floor, "I'll do everything I can." 15 minutes later, shaken by the journey and his heart pounding, Leo leapt from the jeep. "Come on," he shouted to Nafisa. "We've got 5 minutes. Wait here, please," he shouted to Mr. Sahin. The small man nodded, his bony face contorting into something of a grin. The immigration office was quiet as Leo and Nafisa clattered through the door. 3 wooden desks sat around the room. Each desk had a computer screen, a row of stamps, and a pot of pens. At 2 of the desks, immigration officials and keen applicants filled in stacks of brightly coloured paper. At the 3rd desk, a man looked at the screen of a computer through large, round glasses. Leo and Nafisa rushed towards the man and sat opposite him. He looked at them from above the rims of his glasses. He had a wiry forest of grey hair. He said something in what Leo assumed was Thai. Leo was about to ask if he would be able to speak in English when Nafisa answered for them. Leo was impressed. Around them the office was quiet. A large plastic clock on the wall ticked away the minutes until the office closed at 5. A fan on the ceiling creaked as it circulated warm air. Whispered conversation from the other desks echoed from bare walls. Unlike the other people, Leo and Nafisa had none of the documentation. Hopefully the immigration official wouldn't need it. The man turned to the computer and began to type Nafisa's information into a form. He paused intermittently to ask Nafisa to clarify something. Leo wished they would hurry up. Omar would be on the ferry to Koh Samui soon. The immigration official typed for another couple of minutes before climbing to his feet and sauntering across the office. "What's happening?" Leo whispered. "He's got all the information he needs," Nafisa said. "He's just got to print the documents and we need to sort the money." Nafisa drew an envelope from the folds of her shawl and produced a stack of notes. She counted them out with dexterous fingers. 9,850, she said to Leo. "We need 10,000. 150 baht for someone's freedom," Leo thought, taking out his wallet. The mechanical grinding of an old printer echoed from the other side of the room. The official tore the paper at its perforations and began to saunter back. "That's less than 5 English pounds. A tiny price to pay for someone's freedom," Leo thought, and opened his wallet. Then his heart sank. Chapter 34. "Deng, I've been thinking," Kea said, striding as quickly as his size in the small, cluttered room would allow. A thick plastic bag dangled from his hand. Deng looked up from his desk. He was filling in the crossword on the back of a week-old newspaper. "It's time for you to step up and start taking more responsibilities yourself." Kea slumped into his chair, dropped the plastic bag to the floor and nudged it beneath his desk. "I mean, the chances are things will be changing around here pretty soon. Once they find out how quickly I solved this missing persons case, I'll be knocking on the Chief Inspector's door." Deng watched his superior officer. "It'll be fair to say, young man," Kea said, reaching over and putting a thick hand on Deng's shoulder, "that in a year, maybe a little longer, you could be pushing towards, maybe not there yet, but pushing towards becoming a detective." "Really?" Deng said, his eyes bright. "Yes, I can see it for sure," Kea said, releasing Deng's shoulder. "And tonight, I The future Chief Inspector, Kaya. Kaya jabbed a thick finger into his own chest. I'm going to give you an opportunity to begin that journey. Deng beamed and looked around the office. Detective Deng, he muttered. That's right, Kaya boomed, leaning back and interlocking his fingers. I mean, you're not there yet, but I know you soon will be. The job I've got for you tonight is the real test. What's the job? Deng leaned forward, hanging on the inspector's every word. Take the prisoner to Koh Samui. But transporting prisoners requires at least 2 officers, and at least one of them must be senior, Deng said. I know what the rule book says. Kaya examined the fingernails on his right hand. I pretty much wrote it. But on this occasion, when a capable officer like yourself is so close to becoming a senior officer, and the senior officer, me, has so much other important work on, Deng nodded ferociously. Excellent, Kaya said, throwing the keys of the police car to Deng. Go and get the prisoner ready. The boat leaves in half an hour. Watching Deng rush from the office, Kaya smiled to himself. Today, that numbskull made detective, it would be time to find another job. Kaya fished the bottle of rum from the bag on the floor and took a glass from the bottom drawer of his desk. He poured himself a double measure. It was turning out to be a pretty good day. Chapter 35. How could I have been so stupid? Leo thought, gazing down at his empty wallet. 2 business cards were the only thing in the place where he normally kept his notes. He pulled one out. Inspector Kaya, Koh Tao Police. How could he have forgotten he'd paid all his money to see Omar? The official sat back in his chair and showed Nafisa the document. He pointed for her to sign something, which she did. Then he asked for the money. Leo, Nafisa said, do you have the 150 baht? Leo looked deep into the large almond eyes and swallowed. His throat was dry. He felt his heart thumping in his chest and his vision seemed to fizz. I have a credit card. Leo dug out the card and tried to pass it to the clerk. The clerk shook his head and pointed at the sign on the wall behind them. It was handwritten in curvaceous Thai writing. It meant nothing to Leo. Thai baht in cash only, Nafisa said, the sparkle draining from her eyes. Okay, Leo said, leaping to his feet. Ask him where the nearest ATM is. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Nafisa did. The man shook his head and pointed at the clock on the wall behind them. The long hands stuttered past the 59th minute. He says to come back tomorrow. They open at 9, Nafisa said. He says he'll keep this for us then. No, Leo said, thinking of Omar being sent to the prison on Samui that evening. We can't do that. We need it now. We can't, Nafisa said. We'll have to sort it tomorrow. Nafisa collected up the money, slid it back into the envelope, tucked it beneath her shawl, and stood. It'll be all right, she said, feigning a smile. We'll just have to go and get Omar back from Samui. But Leo knew it wasn't that easy. He'd read an article about the prison on Samui. It was notoriously dangerous. Leo rubbed the pockets of his shorts, searching for something, anything that would help, some loose change or forgotten notes, anything that could make up the shortfall. There has to be a way. The second hand on the clock passed the midway point. The office would close in 30 seconds. As the quivering, thin, red hand passed the 10, Leo felt something. A tiny bump in the pocket of his shorts. He dove his fingers into it and gripped the item. Then a smile broke across his face. Nafisa's almond eyes flickered from Leo to the clerk. Leo pulled out Maya's engagement ring and held it up to the light. The diamonds glimmered aggressively. A small price to pay for a man's freedom, he thought, stepping back towards the clerk. Chapter 36. Leo and Nafisa leapt back into the jeep as Mr. Sahin floored the accelerator. The vehicle squealed away from the immigration office. In the back seat, Nafisa beamed. She held the papers, stamped and signed, that would guarantee she could stay on Koh Tao. Move out of the way, Mr. Sahin shouted, palming the horn and shaking a bony index finger at an old guy on a bicycle. The guy stopped and pulled his bike to the side for the jeep to fly past. Leo looked at Mr. Sahin and smiled. It looked as though the guy was enjoying the chase after all. A few minutes later, the jeep skidded to a stop outside the police station. There was no police car outside now. Leo jumped from the jeep and rushed to the front door of the station. The same woman sat at the reception desk and the same radio played. Leo said between gasps, I need to see Inspector Kea. Nafisa crashed through the door a second behind him. The receptionist picked up the phone and thumbed one of the buttons. Who are you? She said, cupping the microphone in her hand. Leo Keane. I'm here to talk to him about his prisoner. The receptionist nodded and relayed the information to the inspector. Seconds ticked by in the quiet office. The tune on the radio faded and another began. Through, the receptionist said, replacing the handset. Leo weaved past the desk and into the back of the police station. Nafisa followed. Inspector Kea was leaning back in his chair with his feet up on the desk. Mr. Keane, I thought I'd seen enough of you, Kea said. A bottle of rum was open on the table in front of him. Thank you for the drink, Kea said, lifting a tumbler to his lips. It's a very nice donation. Inspector Kea, Leo said hurriedly, it's about Omar. I know for certain you have the wrong man. He dismissed the thought with a flick of his hand. You are wrong. Do you know that I have the best arrest record in the whole of the Thai police force? Kea raised his eyebrows as though to impress the fact on Leo. His small, dark, bloodshot eyes gleamed. Well, I can prove that Omar didn't do it. Leo's heart thudded in his chest. Of course, I want to know what happened to Maya, but Omar wasn't involved. All you're doing by charging him is letting anyone who really was involved go free. Kea brooded over Leo's words. And if you let that man go to Samui, Leo said, pulling a rugged breath in the humid office, I'll go back home and I'll do an interview with every newspaper I can about how you've screwed up this investigation. Kea's mouth knotted into a snarl. He dropped his feet to the floor and slammed the glass down on his desk. Leo recoiled at the noise. What do you know? Kea barked. Inspector Kea, Leo said. This is Nafisa, Omar's wife. She was with Omar during the time you suspect he was involved in Maya's disappearance. Omar couldn't tell you, because at that time she didn't have the correct papers to be here, but now she does. The inspector's gaze tightened. He looked Nafisa up and down. Show me, he growled, leaning forwards. Nafisa stepped across the office and slid the papers between the inspector's thick fingers. His bloodshot eyes scanned the documents. You say you were with the suspect the whole evening? Kea said to Nafisa. Yes, he came back to the room around 8 and then went out to look for Maya with Leo just before 10. Kea scowled. Then it cannot have been him. I cannot have people finding out about this. The problem is, Deng has already taken the prisoner to the pier. I thought the boat wasn't until 7, Leo said. No, Kea said, grabbing up the phone. Because of the high tide, the sailing was brought forward. The boat leaves in 20 minutes. We need to stop him getting on that boat, Leo said. You can't take an innocent man all the way to Samui for no reason. Kea picked up the phone and dialed a number. Nothing happened as the seconds ticked by. The phone signal on this island is no good. Deng has also taken the car. That's not a problem, Leo replied. We have a ride. Chapter 37. Koh Tao's main port of May Head was a scene of chaos as Deng pulled the police cruiser to a stop on the quayside. 3 large ferries waited to depart. Tourists sprawled this way and that in search of tickets, supplies for the journey, or even the correct ferry itself. Some of the port's fishing fleet had also started returning, their brightly coloured boats bobbing in the restless waters of the harbour as they waited for space at the quay. Making sure the handbrake was fully applied, Deng had heard stories of an unlucky officer who had let the car once roll into the sea. He got out. A group of fishermen, carrying their heavy loads, glared at the inconsiderate parking. Deng snarled at the men and they shuffled off, their backs bent under the weight of their catch. Deng opened the car door, pulled the prisoner out, and then rattled the handcuffs. Nothing was going to go wrong. He was responsible for this prisoner. Detective Deng. Deng noticed that the cuff on the prisoner's left wrist could go a little tighter. He squeezed until it clicked. The prisoner winced. Deng smiled. Detective Deng. The title did have a certain appeal to it. Deng slammed the car door and led the prisoner towards the boat at the end of the pier. The Koh Samui ferry was the largest of the 3. It was painted in a livery of red and white and dwarfed the wooden pier. Passing a line of tourists, Deng showed his ID to the man checking tickets and pushed straight up the ramp onto the boat. He marched the prisoner into the air-conditioned cabin and shoved him down into a seat by the window. This would be an easy job. All he had to do was watch this guy and hand him to another officer on the other end. Detective Deng. He smiled again at the thought. The ferry's powerful diesel engines kicked into action, sending a shudder through the cabin. Deng looked out of the window. The final few tourists were being let up the ramp. The boat shuddered further as the captain revved his engines. The water of the harbour churned into foam. It was an easy job, Deng thought, sitting next to the prisoner. Detective Deng could handle this with his eyes closed. Chapter 38. If Mr. Sahim was worried to drive at speed with a senior police officer on board, then he didn't show it. "Faster!" Kaya shouted from the passenger seat, taking a sip from a glinting silver hip flask. "I can't let this guy get to Samui. It will be embarrassing for the whole island." As Sahim accelerated around the corner, Leo glanced at Nafisa. She looked anxiously out of the window. Thick tyres crunched and slid as the jeep swerved around a goat with a large bell strapped to its neck. Mr. Sahim took a corner at speed and then hit the brakes to avoid colliding with a faded blue truck. The truck's load of green coconuts wobbled over the bumpy road. Inspector Kea leant from the window and shouted at the driver. There was no response. The police inspector's voice was clearly lost against the rattling vehicle. Reaching a short straight on the winding road, Mr. Sahim gripped the wheel hard and punched the accelerator. The jeep powered past the truck in a cloud of dust. Great billows of black smoke curled from the twin funnels of the Koh Samui ferry. They were ready to depart. All the tourists were now on board and the ramp was moments from being hoisted onto the deck. Impatiently, the captain sounded the horn. A flock of gulls assembled on the railing next to the boat flapped into the air. The reason for the captain's frustration was a small fishing trawler which had just slipped into the harbour and stopped in the busy thoroughfare between the pier and the open sea. Equally annoyed by the situation, the skipper of the fishing boat was out on the deck, gesticulating at the captain of the ferry. The captain responded with another harsh, single note on the ship's horn and a burst of power from the engines. The small fishing boat bobbed and weaved as the waters of the harbour turned milky white in the ferry's strong wake. The skipper held on to avoid falling over. With another exaggerated gesture, he stepped back inside, fired up the trawler's engines and pushed off in search of a better place to wait. With their route clear, the captain of the ferry ordered the ship to be untied. They were ready to depart. Mr. Sahim palmed the jeep's horn as they approached the dock at speed. Inspector Kea leant from the passenger window and yelled at anyone nearby. "Get out of the way!" he shouted. People leapt, not a moment too soon, right or left. A pair of young women drinking from coconuts sprung to the right. One of them dropped her coconut, which cracked across the jeep's windscreen. Coconut water splashed across the front of the vehicle and the inspector. Kea wiped his face with his sleeve. The jeep skidded to a stop at the entrance to the pier. Everyone jumped out and started in the direction of the ferry. A cloud of black smoke rose from the funnels of the red and white boat. The top deck was crammed with tourists. Their bright clothes shimmered in the afternoon's haze. Inspector Kea didn't wait. He barged towards the pier, pushing a group of fishermen to the side. Anyone who got in his way got yelled at or shoved to the side. Kea reached the walkway as it was being raised. He waved his hands in the air. Leo, Nafisa and Mr. Sahim stood at the entrance to the pier and watched as the ramp was lowered again. Then Kea, with surprising balance, ran onto the boat. A few seconds later, the ferry's engines quietened to a distant rumble and the billowing smoke reduced to the occasional curling tendril. It seemed like hours as Leo watched the ramp. Nothing moved. The ferry, which a few moments ago had been pulling against its moorings, now sat still in the harbour. Above the sound of his heartbeat thumping in his ears, Leo heard the whine of seabirds, the chatter of passing tourists, and the distant idling grumble of the ferry's engines. Then, on the deck of the ferry, Leo saw Kea and Deng appear from the crowd. They paled into insignificance, though, when he saw the man with the beaming smile walking behind them. Nafisa squealed. thrust the papers she dared not let go of yet into Leo's hands, and ran to greet her husband. Leo watched, and the first smile of the last 24 hours broke across his face too. Chapter 39. With the guttural thump of its strong diesel engines and a bellow from its horn, the ferry broke from the dock. On the quay, tourists milled about, dock workers rushed from place to place, and fishermen dragged great plastic buckets of shimmering fish. From the railing of the departing ferry, Leo didn't notice any of these people. His eyes were fixed entirely on the couple waiting in the middle of the quay. As the boat began to lumber in the direction of the open sea, Leo waved. Omar and Nafisa, standing hand in hand, did the same. The previous day now seemed like a dream, a chaotic, awful, but long ago dream. Maya was gone. Leo hadn't even begun to accept that yet. He would have to start soon, but what was more important right now was that an innocent man was not getting blamed for it. The ferry curved to the right and the quay became small. Leo saw Omar and Nafisa merge back into the crowd. He knew what they were going to do now. To walk on the beach, Omar had said that morning, his smile wider and more all-encompassing than ever before. To walk on the beach together and know that no one is chasing us anymore. Leo felt a smile play at the corner of his mouth, and he turned to face the open ocean. He knew that Maya was out there somewhere, and, as the ship's horn bellowed again, he knew he was going to have to find her on his own. Epilogue. It was raining in Brighton. It was always raining in Brighton. The sky congealed from autumnal orange into ranks of grey some time ago, and now the storm raced and bubbled overhead. For Leo, standing alone in his kitchen as the kettle rumbled to the boil, thoughts of boat rides and island sunsets were a long way away. They had been for nearly 2 years. One thing hadn't changed, though. His his need to find out what had happened to Maya. Steam curled from the kettle as it finally rattled to the boil and clicked off. Leo dumped a tablespoon of coffee into a cup, added a splash of milk and then filled it with boiling water. Moving into the front room, the biggest in his third-floor flat, Leo rubbed the cold from his hands. He knew that he really should put the heating on, but since he lost his job, the bills were already problematic. Leo lived in one of the large Victorian terraced houses that lined Brighton streets. Once grand, the house had many years ago been split into 4, and Leo's portion of it was right at the top. He'd lived in the flat for so long that now he found the curling wallpaper, threadbare carpets, and the draughty windows homely. His desk, occupying a large proportion of the room, was positioned in the bay window. On a good day, you could see the sea sparkling to the left. But today, the air hung thick and grey, and the rain hammered the greasy glass. I really should get those curtains fixed, though, Leo thought. Then I wouldn't have to look out at the pounding weather. Sitting at his desk, Leo shook the mouse, and the 2 screens of his computer twitched to life. On one screen was the website he ran, Missing People International, its green banner taking up the whole top third of the display. On the other, a computer program continuously searched the internet. The search was based around the most recent images he had of Maya. It included the locations she wanted to visit, carefully chosen keywords, and a more general description. It had been running non-stop for almost 2 years. A dialogue box flashed in the centre of the screen. It displayed an article from a Peruvian newspaper. Clicking the box, a page of Spanish text appeared before being translated automatically by the software. The article was about 2 so far unnamed British tourists who died in a climbing accident. Scanning through, Leo found that neither was 28, the age that Maya would now be. He moved it to the red folder. That way, the system didn't bring it up again. Leo took a sip of the coffee and let his eyes lose focus on the screens. The room was a reminder of his mission, the mission his life had become. Chipped paintwork, grey, bare carpets. On one wall, a map of the world was surrounded by the articles Leo had been unable to dismiss. He pinned them up, hoping to see a pattern. One day, 2 might match and lead him to something. a clue as to where Maya had gone. A notification appeared from the Missing People International Forum. It was the most popular part of the site, a vibrant community of people with one sad common factor. Someone they loved was lost. To read it was heartbreaking. Leo had to remind himself of the importance of his work. It wasn't just about getting him closer to finding Maya, but also helping the hundreds or thousands of people with unanswered questions in their lives, a question mark hanging where there once was a man, a woman or child. The notification was a post from a lady in Cyprus looking for her son who'd not been seen in 2 weeks. Leo knew the feeling. He dealt with it every day. Posting the link for the Things to Do When a Loved One is Missing page from the website and a personal note, he closed the email. Another person with a part of their life gone. He wished her well, but in reality, he knew there was very little anyone could do. 2 years ago, when Maya disappeared, Leo didn't know anything about missing people. He had so many questions. What to do first? What authorities to contact? How do you make the local police take it seriously? Leo assumed that there were people whose job it was to find those that were missing. It was a painful realisation when he learnt that there weren't. Police forces around the world are stretched thin, so when an adult goes missing, it's assumed that they want to be lost, and maybe one day will just come back. Leo sat back in the chair and listened to the rain thrashing against the glass. Maya was out there somewhere, and one day he would find out where. Thank you so much for listening to Koh Tao's audiobook. I really appreciate that so much. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed reading it to you and writing it as well. Just so that you know, if you haven't read/listened to it already, Kathmandu is Leo's first real case. It takes him to the mountain city of Kathmandu. That's my debut novel, that one. You can read it or listen to it now at lukerichardsonauthor.com/Kathmandu, lukerichardsonauthor.com/Kathmandu, or search on your favourite ebook or audiobook website. Kathmandu. Leo's jobless, crippled by anxiety, and obsessed with a girl he hadn't seen in 2 years. Just as things reach an all-time low, Leo's thrown a lifeline. A politician's missing daughter has been traced to Kathmandu. Leo must go there and find her, if his anxiety and the mysterious city will allow. Escaped from her family and travelling the world, all Allissa wants to do is be left alone. Running a hostel for the victims of people traffickers in Kathmandu, she hopes the surrounding mountains will keep the world away. In a bid to prove himself, Leo sets off on a twisting trail through Kathmandu's labyrinthine streets. But with a storm on the way, the city revealing a dark side and unexpected danger around every corner, can he find Allissa and get out alive? Kathmandu is the first of my international thriller series. If you like fast-paced mysteries, then you'll love this explosive debut. And that, as I say, is available at lukerichardsonauthor.com/Kathmandu. The first few chapters of Kathmandu will also be available after this, so just in a couple of minutes' time. Before we do that, I do just want to say a massive heartfelt thank you for taking the time to listen to this. As I said at the start, becoming a writer has been a goal, an aim, a dream of mine for so long. And in 2020, I finally left my job as an English teacher in a secondary school to do that. Every book that gets listened to, that gets read, that gets downloaded, every review that gets left, every recommendation that gets made gets me just a little bit closer to that. So although for you this hopefully has just been an enjoyable couple of hours, an entertaining story, for me it's much more than that, and I really do appreciate that. Talking about reviews, if you are able to leave a review for this book, an honest review, I would massively appreciate that. You can do that on Audible, you can do that on Kobo or any one of the other audiobook platforms, or just leave a review for the ebook. I appreciate that too on Amazon, Kobo, iBooks, those sorts of things. If you go to lukerichardsonauthor.com/reviews, you'll have all the information there. Thank you so much. I really hope to be able to talk to you again at some point in one of the future books. Also, I've mentioned at the start my mailing list. I love keeping in touch with people that enjoy my writing. That's lukerichardsonauthor.com, and you can just join the mailing list there. I get in touch every week or so and just share with you what I'm up to, what I'm working on, and the next things to come out. Thank you so much. I'll say that again because I really do mean it. Enjoy the first couple of chapters of Kathmandu, and I really, really hope to share another story with you very, very soon. Kathmandu Prologue. The building shook with the explosion. Heat, dust, and debris billowed in every direction. Metal crunched against concrete. The lights flickered and then died. All was quiet. Somewhere on the street, a car alarm yelped twice before silencing itself. A pair of ceiling tiles fell from their mountings and crashed to the floor. Escaping water hissed somewhere nearby. Two men, sheltering behind the thick concrete wall, heard very little. Heavy-duty ear defenders made sure of that. They would have felt it, though. The force would have rattled through their bones as they sat, bodies tensed against the wall. The men looked around the dark room. The larger of the two snapped on a torch and swept it over the destruction. A light fixing swayed on its wire. A desk lay on its side, papers and files scattered across the carpet. Broken glass peppered the floor around an empty window. A notice board lay on its side, its contents shredded by the blast. The second man stood and whistled as he took in the devastation. "That did the job," he said, facing his colleague. The larger man nodded and turned towards the explosion's epicentre. The finger of light from his torch swept through the dust hanging thick in the air. The other man followed. The closer they got, the denser the dust became. "Time locked my arse," the first one said, his voice muffled by the face mask. "I knew we'd get it open." It sounded as though he was smiling. Both men wore masks just in case any cameras had survived the blast. The masks also helped with the dust. These guys knew what they were doing, the ultimate professionals. Powdered concrete danced in the beams as they swept across the room before converging on a pile of twisted metal on the floor. "Piece of cake," the other man said, his torch rising to illuminate the gnarled gap where the vault's door had stood steadfast just moments ago. "It's lucky no one knows this place is here, though." On an industrial park in Brighton's suburb, there were few residents to consider at this time of day. The men had already taken care of the two-person security detail. They would wake up in a few hours after some very lucid dreams. "We better get moving. Car alarms will be going off from here to Lewis." The first man stepped over the twisted door and into the vault. Rows of safety deposit boxes in various sizes made up 3 walls of the small room. Each had a number and a keyhole. "Look at this place," the second man said. "Imagine all the—" "We're just here for 1 box." The other man cut in. He turned the torch on his colleague. "Don't even think about it. We get what we came for, then we get out. We're getting paid enough already. Understand?" "Yeah, of course." "Box 288, there, look." He pointed across the room with a gloved hand. "Get that open, then we're gone." Kathmandu, Chapter 1. Sundown in Kathmandu. A blinding orange sun sinks through a fragmented wall of clouds. Shafts of haggard, uncompromising light signal the falling blanket of dusk. Behind the sprawling city, the silver backs of the Himalayas stand resolute. The clang and yammer of daytime production mutes as merchants, makers and menders pack away the tools of their trade. A welder, a bicycle repairman, a tyre salesman, their work for the day complete in the concern for the hunger of their families met. In upstairs windows, lights begin to blaze. The smell of spice and onions replaces oil, paint and rubber. 2 young men make their way through a back street. Kathmandu is a warren of them, allowing people to scuttle unseen. Concrete structures stand tall on both sides, leaving a narrow, dusty path. The going is difficult, but they know it'll be worth it. As they turn left at a crossroads, the narrow passage forces them into single file. They walk in silence. The man in front lights a cigarette. It flares in the shadows. The sky is just a strip of dirty orange between the buildings. It's a constant glowing reminder of human creation. The residents are used to these people. A rabble of them have passed through their city, homes and restaurants for as long as anyone can remember. For some, It's the beginning of a journey, perhaps Pokhara or Everest. For others, it's the end, a final stop before the road becomes impassable, inconvenient or uncomfortable, and the flight home beckons. The men walk towards the end of the passage, a dead end, the concrete wall of the building. Its ugly construction is bulky and mysterious in the darkness. Pipes and wires bulge like veins across its skin. They know what they seek. They need to look for the light. A bare bulb, swinging on its wire, encircled by insects, hangs above a door. It's the only thing that separates the door the men are seeking from any other. Soon, darkness will embody the sky, though not the city. Residents keep their lights burning, believing that with darkness comes trouble. Trouble they could no better see than understand, trouble they should have forgotten long ago. The door opens before the men reach it. A man with an oily smile stands in the gloom. Nodding as they enter, the man shows them to a table in the dark room. The small restaurant is kept dark on purpose. "You want the lamb? We have the lamb again," he says when they're seated. The men nod, order beers, and resume their conversation. They're travelling on tomorrow, out into the mountains, hiking somewhere. The waiter can't work out where, even in the quiet of the empty restaurant. The waiter places bottled beers on the table. Neither of the young men look up. He hangs back in the shadows listening. "Looking forward to leaving this city," one says to the other. "Yeah, it's not been." From the scraps of conversation, the waiter makes a decision. "There are so many other places. We're getting out tomorrow." The oily grin runs across his face as he clicks a switch on the wall. The light outside, "Look for the light," dies into darkness. Kathmandu, Chapter 2. I'm going to kiss you now, Leo thinks, his confidence burgeoning from an evening of shared drinks, smiles and laughs. I'm going to kiss you now. It's the second time he and Maya have met. It's going well. They started drinking in a wooden-beamed pub in the lanes hours ago. The night was busy. People stumbled in groups from one place to the next, but Leo hadn't noticed any of them. A basement cocktail bar, metal stairs, gleaming bar stools, low lighting, a booth at the back designed for those taking part in a night just for two. And then they were out, laughing in the lustrous morning air, 4 a.m. "Where to now?" Maya asks, crossing her arms against the chill. "India," Leo shouts. Maya giggles and puts her arm through his. "Go on then," she says. "Take me to India." I'm going to kiss you now, Leo thinks again as he gazes down at the curving domes of the Royal Pavilion float in the milky pinks of summertime pre-dawn. The garden's tall flowers mirror the sky with dew-coloured leaves. I'm going to kiss you now, Leo thinks as they drink from cans on the bench in the glinting air. Maya wears his jacket and curves her shape into his. Leo tries not to notice the cold as his hand slips down her back. He traces the contours of her figure beneath the dress he's been looking at all night. They've built a bubble around them which is theirs alone. The world is now just the two of them. This is his moment, their moment. The sun warns of its impending arrival as purple shoots across the clear sky, covering every surface of the ivory pavilion. Time is short. Once the sun comes, their bubble will fade with the waking city. Leo takes a sip of his beer. Breathe. Do it. I'm going to kiss you now, he says, hearing the words before his drunken ears know they've been spoken. Maya looks up at him, her eyes absorbing the colour from the sky. The kiss is hot, sexy, steamy and longing. It's all that Leo's wanted and more. Her skin is soft beneath his. They kiss until they're kissing more than not. They're in their own world, a planet just for them. Leo inhales the smell of her neck and passion passes boiling point. He wants to live in this moment forever. He doesn't want it to end, but he knows it will with the rising sun. Neither notice as the light fades from aubergine to peach. "Oi, get out of here," comes a voice from the direction of the pavilion. "What are you doing? You shouldn't be here." A security guard jogs towards them. Leo pulls on Maya's hand. Time to go. One more kiss as she stands. The bubbles burst. The world is alive. Buses pull sleepy passengers to work. People walk dogs. And the large security man runs after them. Over the fence, they giggle back into the city. Maya rummages through her bag for the key, fits it into the lock, and leads Leo in. the bed still covered with the dresses she'd laid there earlier. From where Leo lies, the light catches Maya's jawline, her strong cheekbones, her figure. Her dress slips to the floor in a mix of excitement and awe. Her body's a silhouette. Maya moves towards him, but he's already there, already living it. They roll like thunder into the darkness and into the silence. Kathmandu, Chapter 3. Leo woke, lifted his head and looked around. He wasn't in bed. In front of his unfocused eyes, the two screens of his computer glowed in the darkness, and beyond them, rain hammered against the greasy glass of the window. He rubbed his face and stretched. What time is it? He glanced at the clock, 5 a.m. The sun would soon be making an appearance. A number of notifications on the screen demanded Leo's attention. He squinted at them. The symbols danced in front of his eyes. How long have I been asleep? Since losing his job a week ago, Leo spent almost every waking hour at his computer. He felt as though he were losing track of time in general. He gazed past the fingers of rain lashing at the window and towards the darkened sea. All he thought about was Maya. He had been looking for her for nearly 2 years now. Every night he sat at his computer and scrolled through possible leads. Now he didn't have a job, he could do it in the daytime too. He sorted through pictures, social media posts, articles, videos, separated those that could be her from those that definitely weren't. Leo analysed anything that could provide him with an explanation about where Maya had gone. The way Leo saw it, she was either dead or had chosen to go. Neither option was good, neither brought him solace, but he needed something. Leo reached for the cup of coffee on the table beside him, lifted it to his lips, and grimaced at the cold taste of the liquid. When Maya had first disappeared, friends and family had been supportive, meeting his morose moods with concerned smiles and empathy. Anything you need, let us know. That soon changed into offers to help him move on, to find someone new. You can't spend your whole life looking for her. Then, as Leo declined invitations in favour of the search, friends became just irksome distractions, figures hanging unseen on life's periphery. Leo struggled out of his seat and stretched. At least now, without work to worry about, he had more time to spend on the search. If ever there was a perfect opportunity to find her, this was it. Thank you so much. Again, that was the first 3 chapters of my debut novel, the first full-length novel in the Leo and Allissa series. You can start reading or listening to that today at lukerichardsonauthor.com/Kathmandu. That's spelled Kathmandu. Thank you so much again. As I've said many times, making a living from my stories has been a dream of mine for many years. And by reading this book and listening to this, you are helping that become a reality. I hope to share another story with you very, very soon. Thank you so much. Koh Tao, written by Luke Richardson and read by Luke Richardson. The end.